For most of human history, night was not silent or safe. Darkness meant cold air, unseen animals, and a world humans could not fully control. Yet our ancestors rarely slept far from one small thing that changed everything. Long before houses or electric lights, they rested beside a living flame. Fire was warmth, protection, and the fragile boundary between the human body and the wilderness beyond it. For hundreds of thousands of years, sleep happened inside that quiet circle of light. If that habit shaped the way humans experience night, a simple question begins to appear. Why did 90% of human history sleep near fire? For most of the time that humans have existed on Earth, night arrived as something far larger than a simple absence of daylight. When the sun disappeared below the horizon, the landscape changed in ways that the human body could not easily control. Temperatures dropped. Colors faded into shades of grey and black. Sounds carried farther through the cool air. The world that had been visible during the day became uncertain again. Long before cities, lamps, or walls, the coming of darkness meant entering a space where human senses were limited and the surrounding environment was suddenly more powerful. The earliest members of our species evolved in African landscapes where night could be cold, quiet, and unpredictable. Even in regions where the daytime sun was strong, the temperature often fell sharply after sunset. A body that had spent the day moving through warm air could quickly feel the chill of open ground once darkness arrived. Without insulation, modern clothing, or enclosed buildings, early humans had to find ways to endure those nightly changes. In that ancient setting, the question of where to rest was never only about comfort. It was about survival through the long hours before sunrise. The human body is not naturally equipped with many of the features that allow other animals to move safely in darkness. Compared with nocturnal species, human eyes gather less light at night. Our sense of smell is relatively weak. Our hearing is useful but not specialized for detecting faint movements in dense vegetation. In daylight, these limitations matter little. In darkness, they become more serious. For early humans, night reduced awareness of what might be moving nearby. A rustling grass or a distant sound could mean wind, a harmless animal, or a predator. The body remained alert because uncertainty itself carried risk. This vulnerability helps explain why nighttime behavior was shaped so strongly by the surrounding environment during the early history of our species. Archaeological evidence suggests that early human groups often selected resting places with care. Natural shelters such as rock overhangs, shallow caves, or areas with clear views of the surrounding land provided some advantage. These locations reduced the number of directions from which danger could approach. Even so, darkness remained difficult to manage. Unlike animals adapted for night activity, humans depended heavily on sight to understand their surroundings. When sight disappeared, so did a large part of their control over the environment. This was the reality that shaped human nights for hundreds of thousands of years before modern technology appeared. The long evolutionary story of our species began in a world where darkness was not easily pushed away. The earliest Homo sapiens emerged roughly 300,000 years ago, but the broader human lineage stretches back much further through earlier human ancestors. Across that immense span of time, every sunset created a similar challenge. Once the sky darkened, human groups had to rely on strategies that reduced exposure to the dangers of night. Resting close together in small groups provided one layer of safety. Choosing open ground where movement could be heard offered another. Remaining still and conserving energy through the coldest hours of darkness also helped the body endure until morning returned. These simple behaviors formed the foundation of human nights long before people shaped the environment in more dramatic ways. Within this ancient rhythm, the night was never entirely silent. In many ecosystems, predators became more active after sunset. Lions, hyenas, leopards, and other carnivores often hunted during the cooler hours when their own senses were strongest. Early humans shared these landscapes with animals that were faster, stronger, and better adapted to darkness. The human advantage lay not in physical power but in cooperation and intelligence. Groups that stayed together increased their awareness of danger. One individual might wake at a sound while others slept. A small community could detect movement more easily than a single person alone. In this way, human survival at night depended heavily on social behavior and shared vigilance. Yet even cooperation had limits when darkness covered the land. Without a reliable source of light or warmth, Night remained an uncertain territory that humans could not fully control. This environment formed the starting point for understanding how the human relationship with fire would eventually transform the experience of night. As darkness settled over ancient landscapes, human groups entered a period of the day that required patience and restraint. Movement slowed, voices lowered, energy had to be conserved. For most of human history, people did not fill the night with activity the way modern societies do. The absence of light limited what could be done safely. In many environments, the safest strategy was simple: remain close to others, remain quiet, and wait for the return of daylight. This rhythm shaped the earliest human relationship with night. Sleep itself was rarely separated from the surrounding environment. Early humans did not retreat into enclosed bedrooms or insulated shelters. Their resting places were often simple areas on the ground, sometimes protected by rock formations, shallow caves, or clusters of vegetation that reduced wind. These places were chosen carefully, but they still remained part of the natural landscape. The air moved freely. Night sounds were clearly audible. The boundary between the human group and the wider world was thin and fragile. Because of this, the human body did not completely abandon awareness during sleep. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have observed that sleep within groups often involves shifting patterns of wakefulness. While some individuals sleep deeply, others remain lightly aware of their surroundings. Over the course of the night, these states change and rotate naturally among members of the group. No formal guard is required. Instead, the group as a whole maintains a quiet form of vigilance. This pattern may reflect a very old strategy that helped human communities remain aware of danger even while resting. In such conditions, the experience of night was never entirely separate from the surrounding ecosystem. The ground carried vibrations from movement. The air carried distant sounds. A branch breaking in darkness could be heard from surprising distances. For early humans, these signals were part of the background of every night. The human brain evolved to treat unfamiliar sounds in darkness as information that might require attention. Even while resting, the body remained prepared to wake quickly if something unusual occurred. This balance between sleep and awareness allowed groups to endure nights in environments that were not fully secure. Over the long span of human evolution, these nightly conditions repeated themselves again and again across different landscapes. Whether in African savannas, wooded valleys, or open grasslands, darkness reduced visibility and increased uncertainty. The natural world did not pause when humans attempted to rest. Many animals became active precisely when the sun disappeared. Some hunted, others moved between feeding grounds. The quiet hours of night were often full of subtle movement that humans could hear but not easily see. This constant uncertainty influenced where and how people rested. Locations that offered some advantage were favored over time. Elevated ground, for example, allowed wider views of the surrounding land before nightfall. Rocky terrain sometimes discouraged larger predators from approaching silently. Areas with natural barriers reduced the number of directions from which animals could approach. These decisions were not random. Over many generations, human groups learned to recognize landscapes that provided slightly safer nights. Yet even the best location could not remove the deeper challenge of darkness itself. The human species evolved primarily as a daylight creature. Our eyes are adapted for color vision and detail under bright light, not for navigating in darkness. When daylight disappeared, human awareness of the environment dropped sharply compared with animals that specialized in night activity. This biological limitation meant that early humans had only a few options for coping with the hours between sunset and sunrise. They could reduce movement, remain together, and choose locations carefully. But without some way to reshape the environment itself, the night remained largely beyond human control. Understanding this limitation is essential for seeing why a single discovery would eventually transform human nights. When humans learned not only to use fire but to keep it alive through the darkness, the relationship between people and the night began to change in ways that would echo through nearly all of human history. The long human relationship with night was shaped by a simple reality. Darkness belonged more to the natural world than to people. When the sun disappeared, humans did not suddenly lose the need for rest, but the environment around them changed faster than the body could adapt. The land cooled. Visibility shrank. The sounds of animals moving through the landscape became easier to hear but harder to interpret. In that setting, the human experience of night was defined less by control and more by endurance. Each sunset marked the beginning of a period that had to be passed through carefully until daylight returned. Across the immense span of early human history, groups learned to shape their nightly behavior around these conditions. Instead of spreading out widely, people often gathered closer together as darkness approached. This closeness provided several advantages. It reduced isolation, increased the number of ears listening for unusual sounds, and allowed warmth from nearby bodies to slightly soften the chill of night air. Sleeping together did not eliminate danger, but it improved the odds that someone would notice a disturbance. In this way, cooperation continued even during the hours of rest. The human brain played an important role in this nightly strategy. Even while sleeping, the brain remains capable of detecting unexpected noises. Certain sounds, sharp movements, unfamiliar animal calls, sudden disturbances in vegetation can trigger a rapid waking response. This sensitivity is not unique to humans, but in our species it became part of a broader pattern of group survival. When one person stirred or woke, the movement could subtly alert others nearby. Over time, these small signals helped groups respond more quickly to potential threats during the night. The night landscape itself often determined where humans felt most comfortable resting. Areas that were too dense with vegetation made it difficult to hear approaching animals. Places with limited visibility could hide movement until it was very close. As a result, many early human camps were likely placed where the ground opened slightly into clearer views of the surrounding area. These spaces allowed people to observe the land before darkness fell and to listen more effectively once the night settled in. Choosing such locations was a quiet form of environmental knowledge passed through generations. Still, even in the most carefully selected places, the boundary between human life and the wider ecosystem remained thin. Humans were never the dominant nocturnal species in the environments where they evolved. Many predators possessed sharper night vision, stronger senses of smell, and bodies designed for silent movement through darkness. This imbalance meant that the human strategy for surviving night rarely involved direct confrontation. Instead, it relied on awareness, cooperation, and caution. Groups reduced unnecessary movement and waited for morning rather than competing with animals that were better adapted to darkness. Over thousands of generations, this rhythm of cautious nights and active days became deeply embedded in the human experience. The cycle repeated across continents and climates as human populations slowly expanded beyond Africa. Whether in grasslands, forest edges, or river valleys, the same fundamental challenge appeared every evening. Humans needed rest, yet the environment around them remained uncertain once light disappeared. This persistent tension created a quiet problem in human evolution. The body required sleep to restore energy, memory, and physical strength, but the safest hours for rest were also the hours when the environment became most difficult to understand. Somewhere within this long struggle between the human need for sleep and the unpredictability of night, a small but powerful solution began to appear. At first it may have been accidental, perhaps a natural fire left burning after a lightning strike or a wildfire that humans learned to approach carefully. Over time, however, people began to recognize that fire did something remarkable to the darkness around them. It created a small zone where night behaved differently. Light extended human vision beyond the immediate reach of starlight. Warmth softened the cold that followed sunset. The sounds of burning wood added a constant presence that subtly changed the atmosphere of the night landscape. Within that circle of flame, the environment no longer felt entirely outside human influence. The discovery of how to maintain that flame would slowly transform the meaning of night for our species. Before understanding how humans slept near fire, it is necessary to see clearly the world that existed before that transformation. At some point, deep in the human past, something unusual began to appear in the places where people gathered. In landscapes that had always grown dark after sunset, small patches of light started to remain long after the sun disappeared. The source of that light was not the sky or the moon. It came from the ground itself, from burning wood carefully protected and maintained. For early humans, the discovery of fire was not a single moment, but a long process of learning how to live beside a powerful natural force. Lightning strikes, wildfires, and burning vegetation had existed long before humans appeared. The challenge was not discovering that fire existed. The challenge was learning how to keep it alive. Archaeological evidence suggests that controlled use of fire began hundreds of thousands of years ago. Some of the earliest widely accepted traces of human-managed fire appear in sites dated roughly between 400,000 and 1 million years ago, though the exact timeline remains debated among researchers. What matters more than the precise date is the change that fire introduced into human environments. When a group learned to maintain a fire, the night no longer arrived in exactly the same way it always had. Instead of darkness spreading evenly across the land, a small area remained illuminated and warm. Maintaining a fire required attention and cooperation. Wood had to be collected during daylight hours. Embers needed to be protected from wind and rain. Someone in the group might occasionally wake during the night to add fuel and keep the flame alive. These actions suggest that once fire became part of human life, it quickly became valuable enough to protect. The effort required to maintain it indicates that early humans recognized its importance. A fire that lasted through the night offered something that had rarely existed before, a stable center within the uncertainty of darkness. Over time, this center became physically visible in the archaeological record. Many ancient human camps contain evidence of hearths areas where fire was repeatedly built in the same location. These hearths often appear as layers of ash, charcoal fragments, and burned stones preserved within the soil. Their presence shows that fire was not used randomly. Instead, it became a regular feature of human gathering places. The hearth formed a recognizable point around which daily activities could organize. During daylight hours, people prepared food, shaped tools, and interacted with one another near the same location where fire would later burn after sunset. The emergence of hearths marks an important shift in how humans interacted with their environment. Instead of adapting completely to natural conditions, people began to reshape a small part of the landscape to suit their needs. A hearth created a predictable space within an otherwise unpredictable world. When darkness fell, the fire did not simply provide light. It also acted as a signal that marked the presence of a human group. The glow of embers and flames defined a territory, even if that territory extended only a short distance into the surrounding darkness. Within that space, the human body could behave differently than it had in earlier times. Vision improved within the reach of firelight. The warmth from burning wood softened the cooling air of night. Smoke drifted upward, carrying scents that may have influenced nearby animals. Gradually, night stopped being entirely hostile terrain. It became something that could be partially managed. Even a small flame had the power to change the emotional atmosphere of darkness. A group resting beside a fire no longer faced the night in complete uncertainty. Instead, they occupied a narrow but meaningful zone of influence carved into the surrounding environment. This shift did not eliminate the dangers of night, but it reduced them enough to alter how humans experience those hours. Over many generations, the simple act of keeping fire alive through the night began to shape the rhythm of human life in ways that extended far beyond warmth or light alone. Once early humans learned not only to approach fire but to maintain it, a quiet transformation began to unfold in the places where they lived. Fire did not spread across the landscape like daylight. It remained small, contained, and fragile. Yet within that limited space, the environment behaved differently. A fire created a point in the darkness that people could return to. It offered continuity from one night to the next. In a world where many elements of survival were uncertain, a maintained flame introduced a rare form of stability. Keeping a fire alive required planning that extended beyond the immediate moment. Wood had to be gathered before night arrived. Suitable materials had to be selected so that the fire would burn slowly and steadily rather than disappearing too quickly. Embers often had to be protected carefully, sometimes buried lightly under ash so that they would remain warm and capable of reigniting the flame later. These small practices suggest that early humans developed a growing familiarity with how fire behaved. Over time, this knowledge would have been shared within groups and passed from one generation to the next. The presence of a controlled fire also changed the physical arrangement of human camps. Instead of individuals settling randomly across a resting area, people tended to gather around the same central source of heat and light. The hearth became a focal point that organized the space of the camp. Objects, tools, and food preparation areas often appeared within a limited distance of this center. Archaeological excavations frequently reveal such patterns, where burned material and daily debris accumulate repeatedly in the same location. These traces suggest that fire was not merely used occasionally but became integrated into the regular structure of human living spaces. When night arrived, the hearth took on an even greater role. Darkness no longer erased all detail from the surrounding environment. Within the reach of firelight, shapes and movements could still be seen. Faces remained visible to one another. Hands could continue simple tasks such as repairing tools, preparing food, or adjusting materials for bedding. Even though the illuminated area remained small, it allowed human activity to extend further into the evening than would have been possible in complete darkness. This change did not transform night into daytime, but it softened the abrupt boundary between the two. The warmth produced by fire also influenced where people positioned themselves during rest. In many environments, the air cools rapidly after sunset, especially in open landscapes where heat escapes quickly into the sky. A steady fire created a localized pocket of warmth that reduced the discomfort of cold ground and cooling air. Individuals could arrange themselves at varying distances from the hearth depending on their need for heat. Those closest to the flame experienced the strongest warmth, while others rested slightly farther away in cooler air. This arrangement likely shifted during the night as the fire burned lower and people adjusted their positions. Beyond warmth and light, the presence of fire may also have affected the surrounding ecosystem. The smell of smoke, the crackling of burning wood, and the unpredictable movement of flames created signals unfamiliar to many animals. While not all predators avoided fire completely, many animals behave cautiously around it. For early humans sharing landscapes with large carnivores, even a small reduction in risk would have been significant. A fire did not make a group invulnerable, but it altered the balance between humans and the animals that moved through the darkness. Over many generations, these subtle advantages accumulated. A hearth allowed humans to shape a small but reliable center within their living space. Around that center, daily routines slowly adapted. Daylight hours were used to gather fuel, food, and materials. Evening hours gathered people together near the fire. Night then unfolded within the quiet glow of embers that continued to burn while the group rested nearby. In this way, the simple act of maintaining a flame began to influence how humans experienced the transition from day into night. Over long stretches of time, the repeated presence of fire began to shape human habits in ways that went beyond the practical task of keeping a flame alive. What had once been an unpredictable natural force slowly became part of the daily rhythm of human groups. The effort required to maintain fire meant that it could not simply appear and disappear without thought. It had to be cared for, watched, and supplied with fuel. This responsibility likely encouraged a new form of cooperation within early communities. Different members of a group might gather wood, protect embers from wind, or occasionally wake during the night to keep the flame from fading. In this way, fire was not only a tool but a shared responsibility that tied the group together. Archaeological discoveries help reveal how deeply fire became integrated into human life. At several ancient sites across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia, researchers have uncovered hearths that appear repeatedly in the same locations across long periods of occupation. These hearths often contain layers of ash, charcoal fragments, and stones that were heated many times. The repetition suggests that groups returned to similar places and rebuilt fires in nearly identical positions. Over time, the ground itself recorded these patterns. The hearth became a recognizable feature of the landscape, marking where humans had once gathered and where they would gather again. Such evidence indicates that fire was not merely an occasional convenience. It was something people planned their living spaces around. When a hearth existed, it created a natural center within the camp. During the day, this central point might be used for preparing food or warming materials. As evening approached, the same place could be revived with fresh fuel so that flames would continue burning into the night. The continuity between daytime activity and nighttime rest meant that the hearth served as a bridge between two very different parts of the human day. Instead of night interrupting human life completely, the fire allowed certain elements of daily living to continue within a smaller circle of light. The presence of a maintained flame also altered how humans experienced darkness itself. Before fire became common, night likely felt vast and distant. filled with sounds that came from places people could not see. Fire changed this experience by shrinking the immediate world into a smaller, more visible space. Inside that space, human senses regained some of the control they normally held during daylight. Faces could still be recognized. Tools could still be handled. The ground immediately nearby could be observed rather than guessed at. These small changes reduced the uncertainty that had always accompanied darkness. In evolutionary terms, this shift may have had deeper consequences. When a group gathered near a fire, their attention naturally focused toward the center where the light and warmth existed. This orientation meant that people sat or rested facing similar directions, sharing a common visual environment. Such shared focus may have encouraged communication and interaction during the quieter hours of evening. Over thousands of generations, the repeated pattern of gathering near a flame could have reinforced social bonds within human communities. Night was no longer only a time to endure darkness. It gradually became a time when groups remained together within the protective boundary created by firelight. This transformation did not occur instantly. The knowledge required to manage fire likely developed gradually as human populations spread across different environments. Yet once the practice became established, its advantages were difficult to ignore. A reliable fire offered warmth, light, and a modest sense of control over the night landscape. For early humans, these benefits meant that fire became more than a useful discovery. It became the quiet center of human camps after sunset. From that moment forward, the nightly rhythm of human life began to revolve around a small circle of burning wood that separated people from the surrounding darkness. When fire burned at the center of a human camp, it did something subtle but powerful to the surrounding darkness. The night outside the camp still existed exactly as before. Predators still moved through the landscape. The air still cooled as the ground released the heat of the day. The sounds of insects, wind, and distant animals continued across the land. Yet within the reach of the fire's glow, the environment felt different. Light created a boundary that separated two worlds. Inside the circle of firelight, people could see. Outside it, darkness remained deep and uncertain. This contrast shaped the way humans began to experience the night. Firelight does not travel very far compared with daylight. A small hearth may illuminate only a limited area around it, perhaps just enough for several people to sit, work, or rest nearby. Beyond that space, the land quickly fades back into shadow. For early humans, this meant that fire did not erase darkness. Instead, it carved a small island of visibility within it. The importance of this small island should not be underestimated. In a world where human vision struggled at night, even a few meters of clear sight could change how people felt about their surroundings. Within that illuminated space, the ground could be observed rather than guessed at. The movements of companions could be seen rather than heard, only as shifting sounds. The difference between a nearby object and an approaching animal became easier to recognize. Over thousands of years, this circle of light became a familiar structure in human life. Anthropologists sometimes describe hearth-centered living spaces in which daily activity naturally gathers around a central fire. During the day, the hearth may remain quiet or contain only faint embers. As evening approaches, it becomes active again. Fresh fuel is added, flames rise, and the area surrounding the fire slowly fills with light and warmth. People arrange themselves around this center almost instinctively. The fire becomes the visual anchor of the camp. One reason this arrangement persists across many cultures is that firelight behaves differently from other forms of illumination. Flames flicker and shift constantly as air moves through the burning wood. This movement creates patterns of light and shadow that dance across nearby surfaces. For human eyes, the effect is calming and engaging at the same time. The changing brightness draws attention without overwhelming the senses. Even today, many people find it natural to watch a fire for long periods without feeling restless. This quiet focus may reflect a long evolutionary familiarity with firelight during the evening hours. The circle of light also shapes how sound and movement are interpreted during the night. Inside the illuminated space, most movements belong to members of the group. Outside the circle, sounds remain uncertain and distant. This separation helps the human brain organize the surrounding environment into zones of familiarity and caution. Within the firelight, the group occupies a shared space where cooperation and communication occur. Beyond the light, the larger ecosystem continues its own nighttime activity. In this way, fire does not simply provide visibility, it also creates a psychological boundary that makes the surrounding darkness easier to manage. Archaeological sites often preserve traces of this arrangement. Hearths are frequently located near the center of living areas, with evidence of repeated human activity surrounding them. Stone tools, fragments of food preparation, and other daily materials tend to appear within a limited radius of the hearth. The pattern suggests that people consistently organize their movements around the same focal point. When night arrived, that focal point remained active, while the rest of the landscape grew quiet. Over time, this spatial pattern became deeply embedded in human behavior. Wherever early humans carried fire, they carried with them the ability to create a small, stable center within the unpredictable world of darkness. That center was not large, but it was enough to change how people rested, interacted, and experienced the long hours between sunset and sunrise. As people gathered around a fire at night, the illuminated space did more than make the ground visible. It subtly reorganized the way humans perceived distance and safety. In darkness, the human mind often struggles to judge how far away a sound or movement might be. Without clear visual references, the brain fills in gaps with uncertainty. Firelight reduced this uncertainty within a small area. Objects close to the flame became clearly defined. Shadows marked the edges of that visible space. The boundary between what could be seen and what remained hidden became easier to recognize. This clarity helped the human brain relax slightly, even while the wider environment remained unknown. The size of the illuminated area depended on the strength of the fire and the materials being burned. A modest hearth might cast light only a few steps outward, while a larger fire could extend that glow a little farther. Yet even the smallest flame created a reliable center. Within that center, human senses regained some of the control that daylight normally provided. Hands could move confidently when adjusting tools or arranging bedding. Faces remained visible for communication. The ground could be checked for insects, sharp stones, or other small hazards. These details might seem minor, but over many generations they likely contributed to a more stable nighttime routine. Human groups began to treat the fire as a reference point for organizing their immediate surroundings. Positions within the camp often reflected the distance from the hearth. Those who needed more warmth might settle closer to the flame. Others might rest slightly farther away where the heat was gentler. Objects that were used frequently during the evening, tools, food containers, or prepared materials, were often kept within reach of the light. This arrangement made practical sense. The closer something was to the fire, the easier it was to see and handle after sunset. Such patterns appear repeatedly in archaeological excavations, suggesting that this spatial organization developed early and persisted across many different human communities. The boundary created by firelight also influenced how the human mind interpreted the darkness beyond it. Outside the glow of the hearth, the environment remained active with life. Insects moved through vegetation. Night animals traveled across hunting grounds or foraging routes. These movements produced sounds that drifted toward the human camp. Yet the presence of fire created a contrast that helped people interpret these signals. Sounds from inside the illuminated space could usually be explained immediately. They belonged to companions adjusting their position, feeding the fire, or shifting materials nearby. Sounds beyond the light were treated differently. They signaled activity within the wider landscape rather than within the group. This distinction helped organize the flow of attention during the night. The firelight also affected how humans visually experienced the night sky and the surrounding land. When sitting near a hearth, the immediate foreground remained bright, while the distant environment faded into darkness. The horizon, trees, or rocky shapes at the edge of the camp often appeared only as silhouettes against the dim background of stars. This layered view, bright center, shadowed edges, distant darkness, became a familiar visual structure in human life. Over countless nights, early humans would have repeatedly experienced the world through this same arrangement of light and shadow. Within this visual structure, the hearth functioned as a stable anchor for attention. Human eyes naturally returned to the moving flame, which offered both warmth and a constant visual reference. The gentle flicker of firelight produced patterns that changed slowly, rather than abruptly. This steady rhythm may have helped create a calmer mental environment as evening progressed. Instead of staring into complete darkness, People rested within a space where light moved softly across familiar faces and objects. The contrast between the glowing center and the dark surroundings reinforced a quiet sense of belonging within the group. Over time, this nightly experience likely shaped how humans emotionally understood the presence of fire. It was not simply a tool for cooking or warmth. It became the quiet center of human awareness during the hours when the rest of the world was hidden by night. As evening deepened and the fire continued to burn, the circle of light gradually became the most stable place in the surrounding landscape. Beyond that small space, darkness moved freely across the land. Shadows shifted as the wind moved branches. Animals passed silently through grass or along distant paths. Yet within the reach of the fire, the environment remained predictable. Light revealed the ground, companions, and the immediate objects of daily life. This contrast between stability and uncertainty helped shape how humans positioned themselves during the night. People naturally arranged their bodies within the boundary of the fire's glow. Sitting or lying near the hearth allowed individuals to remain within sight of others. This visibility mattered because the human species relies heavily on visual communication. Facial expressions, small gestures, and shared attention all contribute to how people coordinate with one another. In darkness without fire, many of these signals disappear. Firelight restored them within a limited space. Even after the sun had set, individuals could still recognize one another and respond to subtle movements. The presence of this visible center likely encouraged groups to remain close together rather than scattering across a wider area. The warmth radiating from burning wood reinforced this arrangement. Heat spreads outward from the fire in gradually weakening waves. The ground nearest the flame warms first, followed by the surrounding air. People resting near the hearth could choose positions that balanced comfort and safety. Too close to the fire could be uncomfortably hot, while too far away allowed the chill of night to return. Over time, groups probably learned through experience how to arrange themselves around the flame so that each person could benefit from its warmth. The resulting pattern often placed the fire at the center with individuals resting in a loose circle around it. This arrangement had another subtle advantage. When people faced toward the fire, their attention naturally oriented inward toward the group. The illuminated center allowed everyone to share a common visual focus. Movement within the circle became easy to notice. A person adjusting their sleeping position or rising briefly during the night could be seen without difficulty. This shared awareness strengthened the sense that the group occupied a protected space together. Outside the firelight, however, the environment remained distant and uncertain. The boundary created by light and warmth acted almost like an invisible wall separating the group from the wider ecosystem. The circle of firelight also influenced how humans interpreted the passage of time during the night. Without mechanical clocks or artificial lighting, the burning of wood itself provided subtle signals. Flames grew stronger when fresh fuel was added, and slowly lowered as the wood turned into glowing embers. People resting nearby could sense these changes even without fully waking. The dimming of light, the soft crackling of wood, and the warmth of the air shifting slightly all contributed to a quiet awareness of how the night was unfolding. These sensory cues help people remain connected to the environment even while sleeping. Archaeological patterns suggest that such hearth-centered arrangements were not rare events. In many excavated campsites, the distribution of stone tools, animal bones, and other daily materials forms circular or semicircular patterns around ancient hearths. These patterns imply that people repeatedly positioned themselves in relation to the same central fire. Over generations, the habit of gathering and resting around a hearth may have become deeply familiar within human communities. What began as a practical response to darkness gradually turned into a consistent spatial structure of human life. Within that structure, the small circle of firelight functioned as a quiet boundary that shaped how humans experienced night. It provided enough light to see, enough warmth to endure cooling air, and enough familiarity to allow the body to relax. Surrounded by darkness but anchored by a flame, human groups learned to pass the long hours of night together inside this fragile yet reliable center of light. Long before houses, walls, or modern tools provided security at night, humans lived in landscapes shared with animals that were often stronger, faster, and better adapted to darkness. For much of human evolution, the challenge of night was not only the absence of light, it was also the presence of other creatures moving through the same environment. Many predators became most active after sunset, when cooler temperatures allowed them to travel and hunt with greater efficiency. Lions, leopards, hyenas, and other carnivores frequently moved through the night landscape using senses far sharper than those of humans. For a species whose vision was designed mainly for daylight, this created a clear imbalance. Humans rested during the very hours when some of the most capable hunters of the natural world were awake. In such conditions, early human groups had to rely on strategies that reduced the likelihood of dangerous encounters. Cooperation played a large role. Groups stayed close together, allowing more individuals to listen for unusual sounds or movement. Camps were often placed in locations that offered some natural advantage, such as open ground where approaching animals could be heard more easily. Even with these precautions, however, the night landscape remained uncertain. Darkness reduced the distance at which humans could detect threats, and animals adapted to nocturnal life could move quietly through grass, trees, or rocky terrain. Within this delicate balance between human vulnerability and animal power, the presence of fire introduced an important change. Fire altered the behavior of many animals in ways that early humans likely observed over time. Flames produce light, heat, smoke, and unpredictable movement, all of which are unusual signals within a natural environment. Many animals respond cautiously to unfamiliar sensory cues, especially those that appear suddenly and shift constantly. For creatures that rely heavily on stable patterns in their surroundings, the flickering motion and scent of fire can act as a warning. Ethnographic observations among modern communities that continue to use open fires suggest that animals often keep their distance from active flames. This does not mean that fire guarantees safety, but it may influence how closely animals approach. The heat of a fire creates a localized environment that differs from the surrounding night air. Rising warmth carries the scent of smoke upward and outward, spreading through the nearby landscape. For animals with sensitive noses, this scent may signal the presence of humans before the animals come close enough to see them. The sound of burning wood adds another layer of sensory information. Crackling branches, shifting embers, and occasional bursts of sparks produce irregular noises that contrast with the quieter background sounds of night. These signals combine to create an area that behaves differently from the rest of the landscape. Over many generations, early humans may have noticed that areas with active fires experienced fewer close encounters with certain predators. Even a small reduction in risk would have been meaningful for groups trying to rest through the night. If animals hesitated before approaching a camp with visible flames and drifting smoke, that hesitation could give humans additional time to notice movement and respond. In environments where survival depended on small advantages, this difference mattered. A fire did not remove danger from the night, but it shifted the balance slightly in favor of the human group. Archaeological research cannot always show exactly how animals reacted to ancient fires, but the consistent presence of hearths in human camps suggests that fire was valued for more than warmth or cooking alone. Its continued use across many regions indicates that the benefits it provided were significant enough to justify the effort required to maintain it. Among those benefits, the potential influence on animal behavior likely played an important role. As humans spent more nights resting beside fire, they gradually experienced a version of the night that was different from the one their earliest ancestors had known. The surrounding wilderness still existed, but the glow of flame created a modest barrier between the sleeping group and the animals that moved through the darkness beyond. For animals that move comfortably through darkness, the night landscape is full of information. Smell travels easily through cooler air. Small sounds carry across open ground. Many nocturnal predators possess eyes that gather light far more efficiently than human eyes can. This combination of senses allows them to navigate the night with confidence. Early humans, by contrast, depended heavily on daylight to interpret the environment. When the sun disappeared, much of that ability faded. In the absence of fire, humans resting at night would have been surrounded by animals whose senses remained sharp and active. Within this imbalance, even a small change in the environment could influence how animals behaved. Fire introduced several unusual signals that disrupted the familiar patterns of the night landscape. The most visible of these signals was light itself. In natural settings, bright moving light rarely appears on the ground after sunset unless lightning strikes or vegetation burns. A steady flame therefore represents something unfamiliar to many animals. Some species approach cautiously to investigate, while others avoid the area entirely. The response depends on the animal, the size of the fire, and the surrounding conditions, but the presence of flames often alters the normal movement patterns of wildlife. Heat produced by fire adds another layer of difference. Warm air rises from the burning wood and spreads outward in small currents. These currents carry the scent of smoke, ash, and human presence through the nearby environment. Many mammals rely strongly on smell when deciding whether to approach an area. If smoke reaches them before they are close enough to see the fire, they may already recognize that something unusual occupies the space ahead. This early signal can influence whether the animal continues moving forward or turns away. For early humans resting at night, such hesitation by nearby animals could be valuable. It did not create absolute safety, but it increased the chance that a predator would keep its distance. Sound also plays a role in shaping how animals respond to fire. Burning wood rarely remains silent. As heat breaks apart fibers within branches and logs, small cracking noises occur. Embers shift and fall, occasionally sending sparks into the air. These sounds interrupt the steady background noise of insects, wind, and distant movement. For animals accustomed to recognizing the normal rhythms of nighttime sound, the irregular crackle of a fire may signal a disturbance within the environment. Some animals pause to observe, others choose to avoid the source entirely. The result is often a subtle change in the flow of movement through the surrounding area. Human groups living with fire would gradually become familiar with these effects. Over repeated nights, they could observe which animals approached the camp and which remained farther away. Large predators, in particular, may have shown greater caution around active flames. Fire produces both light and unpredictable motion, two elements that can make an environment harder for predators to approach unnoticed. If the glow of a hearth illuminated the immediate ground, it reduced the ability of an animal to move silently into the center of the camp. Any approach would have to occur through the shifting boundary between darkness and light, where movement could more easily be detected. This interaction between fire and animal behavior likely strengthened the habit of sleeping near a hearth. A group resting beside a maintained flame might experience fewer close encounters with predators than a group sleeping in complete darkness. Over many generations, such differences could reinforce the practice of keeping fire burning through the night. The flame itself became part of the strategy humans used to share the landscape with other animals. Instead of competing directly with nocturnal predators, people created a small environment that altered how those predators behaved. Within that altered space, the human group could rest with slightly greater confidence, while the wider ecosystem continued its movement beyond the reach of the firelight. Over time, the presence of fire may have changed not only how animals behaved near human camps, but also how humans themselves understood the landscape after sunset. Early human groups lived within ecosystems where many predators held clear advantages during the night. Lions, leopards, and hyenas possessed senses that allowed them to move confidently through darkness, detecting movement or scent from considerable distances. Humans, by contrast, were creatures of daylight. Our eyes are adapted for color and detail in bright conditions rather than for gathering the faint light available at night. Without some form of illumination, the human ability to monitor the surrounding environment drops sharply once darkness arrives. Within this imbalance, the glow of a fire created an unusual situation. It did not give humans the same night vision as nocturnal predators, but it restored enough visibility to shift the balance slightly. A flame illuminated the ground immediately around the camp, revealing movement that might otherwise remain hidden. The boundary between the lit area and the surrounding darkness became a kind of threshold. Anything crossing that threshold would often pass briefly through the glow of the fire before entering the center of the camp. This moment of visibility could provide valuable warning. Even a few seconds of notice might allow a resting group to react to approaching danger. Fire also changed how humans arranged themselves during the night. When people rested near a hearth, they naturally formed a loose circle around the source of warmth and light. This arrangement meant that individuals faced inward toward the fire or outward toward the surrounding darkness. Either direction provided some advantage. Facing inward allowed people to observe the group and remain connected with companions. Facing outward allowed them to watch the edges of the illuminated space where movement might appear. In either case, the fire created a central point that organized attention and awareness across the group. In this way, The flame acted almost like a quiet partner in the work of nighttime vigilance. Another effect of fire was the way it altered the emotional experience of darkness. Complete darkness can produce uncertainty in the human mind because the brain receives fewer visual signals about the surrounding environment. The imagination fills that absence with possibilities, some of which may be threatening. Firelight reduces that uncertainty by revealing enough of the immediate surroundings to restore a sense of orientation. People resting beside a flame could see familiar faces, nearby tools, and the ground around them. This visibility may have allowed the body to relax more deeply during sleep while still remaining capable of waking quickly if needed. Over many generations, this combination of practical and psychological advantages likely reinforced the habit of keeping fire burning through the night. A flame provided warmth, a modest degree of protection, and a visible center for the group. None of these factors alone eliminated the risks of sleeping in open environments, but together they created a small zone where human life felt more stable than in complete darkness. Within that zone, people could pass the hours of night with greater confidence that they would notice disturbances before danger arrived too close. Archaeological evidence suggests that this practice became widespread across different regions once the knowledge of fire management spread through human populations. Camps separated by vast distances often show similar patterns of hearth-centered activity. This consistency indicates that the advantages of fire were recognized across many cultures and environments. Whether in cooler climates where warmth was essential or in warmer regions where protection and visibility mattered more, the presence of a hearth remained a common feature of human camps. As a result, night after night, generation after generation, human groups rested within the protective influence of a small flame. The wilderness still surrounded them, but the fire created a boundary that made the darkness beyond it easier to face. When the sun disappears below the horizon, the air near the ground often begins to cool quickly. During the day, sunlight warms the land, rocks, and vegetation. These surfaces absorb energy and slowly release it back into the atmosphere. After sunset, however, that stored warmth escapes into the open sky. Without the steady input of sunlight, temperatures can fall much faster than many people expect. In open landscapes such as grasslands, deserts, or high plains, this cooling can be especially noticeable. For early humans who rested outdoors or in simple shelters, the drop in temperature was not just uncomfortable, it shaped how the body experienced the entire night. The human body maintains a relatively stable internal temperature. To do this, it must constantly balance the heat produced by metabolism with the heat lost to the surrounding environment. When the air grows colder than the body, heat begins to leave the skin and disperse into the environment. If this loss continues for too long, the body must work harder to maintain its internal balance. Muscles may shiver to generate additional warmth, and energy stored in the body is gradually consumed to keep vital organs functioning properly. For individuals resting in cool night air without insulation or enclosed buildings, this process becomes an important part of survival. Early humans did not have the thick fur that protects many mammals from nighttime cooling. Compared with animals adapted for cold environments, the human body relies more on behavioral strategies to remain warm. Clothing made from animal skins eventually provided some protection, but for much of early human history, such coverings were likely limited or simple. Even with basic materials, open air and cold ground could still draw heat away from the body during long hours of rest. In this context, the presence of fire introduced a powerful environmental change. A burning fire releases energy in the form of heat that spreads outward into the surrounding air. The area closest to the flame warms first, followed by a gradually expanding zone of milder temperature. Within this space, the cooling effect of night becomes less severe. People resting near a fire could feel warmth reaching their skin, reducing the amount of body heat lost to the environment. This warmth made it easier to remain comfortable and allowed the body to conserve energy that would otherwise be spent maintaining internal temperature. The influence of fire on nighttime warmth may have been especially important in regions where temperatures drop sharply after sunset. Even in parts of Africa where many early humans lived, nights can become surprisingly cool once the sun disappears. In higher elevations or open savannas, the difference between daytime heat and nighttime coolness can be dramatic. A fire burning steadily through the evening would soften this transition, creating a small pocket of warmer air where the group could gather. Individuals could adjust their position relative to the flame depending on their need for warmth. Those feeling colder might sit closer to the fire, while others might remain a short distance away where the heat was gentler. The ground itself also responds to the presence of a nearby fire. Soil and stones exposed to warmth gradually absorb some of that energy, becoming slightly warmer than the surrounding terrain. When people rested near the hearth, the ground beneath them could feel less cold than areas farther away. This subtle change would make lying or sitting on the earth more tolerable during long nights. Over many hours, the steady heat of burning wood could create a small environment where both air and ground remained warmer than the surrounding landscape. For early human groups, these changes may have made a significant difference in how comfortably they could sleep. Instead of spending the night losing heat to cold air and chilled ground, they could rest within a zone where warmth slowly radiated outward from the hearth. In this way, fire did more than illuminate the night. It reshaped the temperature of the immediate environment, making the long hours between sunset and sunrise easier for the human body to endure. The human body responds continuously to changes in temperature, even during sleep. When the surrounding air grows colder, the body must adjust in quiet ways to preserve its internal balance. Blood vessels near the skin narrow slightly to reduce heat loss. Muscles may tense or produce small movements that generate warmth. These responses help maintain a stable internal temperature, but they also require energy. Over the course of a long night, especially in open environments, the body may expend considerable effort simply to remain warm enough for normal biological functions to continue. In early human history, when people often slept outdoors or in lightly sheltered spaces, this challenge would have been a regular part of nightly life. The presence of a nearby fire altered this situation by changing the temperature of the immediate environment. Warm air rising from burning wood spreads outward and upward, forming a small zone where the surrounding air becomes more comfortable for the human body. Even a modest increase in temperature can reduce the amount of heat lost through the skin. This reduction allows the body to relax some of its protective responses. Instead of constantly working to preserve warmth, the body can shift more energy toward processes associated with rest and recovery. In this way, fire not only provides comfort but also influences how the body manages its resources during sleep. Temperature also affects how easily people fall asleep and remain asleep through the night. Modern sleep research suggests that the human body naturally lowers its internal temperature slightly as it prepares for rest. Cooler air can help support this process, but extreme cold has the opposite effect. When the surrounding environment becomes too cold, the body's effort to stay warm may interrupt the deeper stages of sleep. Subtle awakenings or shifts in position may occur as the body attempts to maintain comfort. For early humans resting in exposed environments, this balance between coolness and warmth would have been important. A nearby fire could create conditions that were neither too cold nor too hot, allowing the body to settle more easily into steady sleep. The ground beneath the body plays a role as well. When people lie or sit directly on the earth, heat transfers from the body into the soil through a process known as conduction. If the ground is cold, this transfer can draw warmth away from the body more quickly. Over many hours, such heat loss may cause discomfort or restlessness during sleep. The warmth produced by a hearth can reduce this effect by slightly heating the surrounding soil and stones. When the ground near the fire becomes warmer than the surrounding terrain, it slows the rate at which heat leaves the body. This change may seem small, but across long nights it could make rest more stable and comfortable. Early human groups likely noticed these effects through experience. Sitting or resting near a fire would gradually reveal that warmth extended outward beyond the visible flames. People could feel the difference between sleeping within reach of that warmth and resting farther away in cooler air. Over generations, these observations may have guided how camps were arranged. Individuals might position themselves in ways that allowed everyone to benefit from the warmth while still leaving space for the fire to burn safely. The result was often a loose circle of resting bodies surrounding the hearth, each person adjusting their distance to maintain comfort. These nightly arrangements illustrate how fire became integrated into the practical rhythms of human life. Gathering wood during daylight hours ensured that warmth would remain available after sunset. Maintaining embers allowed the fire to continue providing heat through the colder parts of the night. In this sense, the flame acted as a quiet environmental tool, helping human bodies endure the cooling world after dark. By shaping the temperature of the immediate surroundings, fire created conditions where rest became more reliable and the long hours before sunrise became easier to pass. Over many generations, the warmth provided by fire did more than offer comfort during cold nights. It slowly became part of the environmental conditions in which human bodies rested and recovered. In the natural landscapes where early humans lived, nights were often cooler than days, sometimes by a considerable margin. Even in regions that feel warm during daylight, the absence of sunlight allows heat to escape quickly after sunset. The air becomes calmer and colder, especially in open terrain. For a species that relies heavily on stable body temperature and long periods of rest, these nightly shifts created a constant challenge. Fire changed that balance by introducing a steady source of warmth that could last for hours. As wood burned slowly through the night, heat radiated outward in all directions. This warmth did not fill the entire landscape, but within a limited distance it softened the cold air that would otherwise surround the resting group. For individuals lying on the ground or sitting near the hearth, the difference could be felt clearly. Skin exposed to the cool night air could warm again when turned toward the fire. Hands and feet, which lose heat more quickly than other parts of the body, could be held near the flame to restore comfort. These small adjustments allowed people to regulate their temperature without constantly waking or moving large distances. Over time, the relationship between the human body and the warmth of fire may have shaped how groups organized their nightly rest. People often positioned themselves at different distances from the hearth depending on how much warmth they needed. Those most sensitive to the cold might remain closer to the center, while others rested slightly farther away. This flexible arrangement allowed the group to share a single fire while meeting individual needs. The resulting pattern often resembled a loose circle or semicircle around the hearth, with each person finding a place where the warmth felt balanced rather than overwhelming. Such arrangements appear repeatedly in archaeological sites where hearths are surrounded by traces of human activity. The warmth of fire also helped stabilize the environment during the quietest hours of the night. As the fire burned, it released heat gradually rather than all at once. Even when the visible flames became smaller, glowing embers continued to radiate warmth into the surrounding air. This slow release meant that the environment around the hearth changed gently over time rather than shifting suddenly. For people resting nearby, this gradual rhythm allowed the body to remain comfortable for longer periods without interruption. Instead of reacting constantly to falling temperatures, individuals could remain still while the embers quietly maintained a pocket of warmth through the darkest hours before dawn. These conditions likely encouraged people to remain close to the hearth during sleep. Moving far away from the fire meant leaving the warm zone and returning to colder air. Staying near the source of heat offered a more stable environment where rest could continue without frequent disturbance. Over generations, this habit would become familiar within human communities. Evening gatherings near the fire naturally transitioned into sleep in the same area where warmth was already present. In this way, the hearth served both social and practical purposes, guiding the group from waking activity into rest without requiring a change of location. Across much of human history, the pattern repeated night after night. Daylight brought movement, hunting, gathering, and travel across the landscape. Evening brought a return to the hearth, where warmth and light created a center for the group. As darkness deepened and the air cooled, people settled into sleep within the gentle heat radiating from the fire. The surrounding wilderness remained cold and dark, but within the circle of warmth the human body could pass the night with greater ease. As daylight faded and the fire began to glow more brightly against the darkening landscape, another quiet transformation occurred within human groups. The hearth did not only provide warmth and light, it also created a place where people naturally gathered. During the active hours of daylight, individuals often moved across the landscape to search for food, gather materials, or explore new territory. These movements spread the group across different parts of the environment. Evening gradually reversed that pattern. As the sun approached the horizon, people began returning toward the place where fire would soon burn again. In this way, the hearth became a predictable point of reunion at the end of each day. This daily return had important social effects. Humans are deeply cooperative creatures, and many aspects of survival depend on sharing information and coordinating behavior within a group. The quiet hours after sunset provided an opportunity for this interaction to occur. When people sat near the fire, they could see one another clearly and remain comfortable even as the surrounding air cooled. Faces were illuminated by the glow of the flame, allowing expressions and gestures to remain visible. In a world without artificial lighting, this small circle of firelight extended the time during which human communication could continue. Anthropologists studying traditional societies that still rely on open fires have observed that evening often becomes a time for conversation and storytelling. The warmth of the hearth encourages people to remain nearby rather than dispersing into darkness. Within this shared space, individuals exchange experiences from the day, discuss plans, and pass knowledge between generations. While the exact details of such interactions in early human history cannot be directly observed, it is reasonable to think that similar patterns may have existed. The fire created a comfortable environment where people could remain awake together after sunset instead of immediately withdrawing into sleep. These moments of shared attention around the hearth may have played a role in strengthening social bonds. When people sit in a circle around a fire, each individual can see and hear the others with relative ease. This arrangement supports cooperative discussion and shared awareness. Over time, repeated evenings spent in this setting may have reinforced the sense of belonging within the group. The hearth functioned not only as a practical tool but also as a social center where relationships were maintained. Children could listen to the voices of older members of the group, learning through observation and conversation. Adults could exchange ideas about hunting routes, gathering areas, or seasonal changes in the landscape. The flickering light of the fire may also have shaped the emotional tone of these gatherings. Firelight produces a soft and shifting illumination that differs from the bright, steady light of modern lamps. Shadows move gently across the ground and surrounding faces, creating a calm visual environment. Many people today still experience a sense of relaxation when sitting near a campfire or fireplace. This reaction may reflect a long familiarity between the human nervous system and the rhythms of firelight during evening hours. For early humans, the glow of a hearth likely signaled a moment when the urgency of daytime survival gave way to a quieter form of connection. Over many generations, the repeated pattern of gathering near fire after sunset may have influenced how human communities organized their time. Daylight hours remained dedicated to movement and resource gathering. Evening became a shared period of rest, communication, and preparation for sleep. Within this rhythm, the hearth served as the transition between activity and rest. People moved from the tasks of the day into the calm circle of firelight, where conversation gradually slowed and the group settled into the long quiet of the night ahead. As people gathered near the hearth in the evening, the environment created by firelight encouraged a slower rhythm of interaction. The intense movement and focus required during daylight hours gradually gave way to quieter forms of attention. Hunting, gathering, tool-making, and travel demanded energy and concentration while the sun was high. Once darkness arrived, those activities became more difficult or less safe to continue. The presence of fire did not restore the full brightness of day, but it provided enough light and warmth to allow people to remain awake together for a time. Within this softer environment, conversation and observation likely became the central activities of the evening. Sitting near a fire naturally draws people into a loose circle. This arrangement allows everyone to remain within sight of one another, while also facing the shared center of warmth and light. Such positioning encourages listening as much as speaking. When one person talks, the others can watch facial expressions and gestures illuminated by the flame. Even small changes in tone or movement become easier to notice when faces remain visible in the glow of firelight. In darkness without a fire, much of this communication would be lost. Voices might still carry through the night, but the visual elements of human interaction would disappear. Firelight restored those elements and allowed the group to remain socially connected after sunset. Anthropological research among present-day hunter-gatherer communities suggests that evening gatherings often include storytelling. Stories may describe events from earlier in the day, experiences from past seasons, or knowledge about animals, landscapes, and weather. These narratives help younger members of the group learn about the world they inhabit. They also preserve collective memory, allowing knowledge to pass from one generation to the next. Although the specific content of ancient human stories is impossible to recover, the conditions created by firelight would have supported similar exchanges. The hearth provided a calm setting where people could share experiences and reflect on the challenges of their environment. This evening period may also have supported the development of language and cultural traditions. Communication becomes more complex when individuals have time to explain ideas rather than simply react to immediate events. During daylight, much of human attention is directed towards survival tasks that require quick decisions. In the evening, when the group gathers near the fire, the pace of life slows. People can describe what they observed during the day, discuss strategies for future activities, or recall events from earlier seasons. Over many generations, these conversations could contribute to the growth of shared knowledge and social rules within the community. Children sitting near the fire would have been important participants in this process. By listening to adults speak and watching how older members of the group interact, they gradually learned the behaviors and expectations that shaped their society. The hearth created a space where this learning could occur naturally. Young listeners did not need formal instruction. They absorbed information simply by remaining present within the circle of firelight. In this way, the evening gathering around the hearth may have functioned as a quiet classroom within early human life. The social atmosphere of these gatherings also helped prepare the group for rest. As the night deepened, conversation would likely become softer and less frequent. Some individuals might fall asleep while others continued speaking quietly or tending the fire. The gradual fading of activity allowed the transition from wakefulness to sleep to occur gently rather than abruptly. Instead of withdrawing alone into darkness, people rested within the presence of their companions and the steady warmth of the hearth. The same circle that supported conversation and shared attention during the evening slowly became the place where sleep began. As the evening gathering around the hearth slowly quieted, the same space that had supported conversation and storytelling began to change its purpose. The circle of people remained, but voices softened and movement became slower. Some individuals stretched out on the ground, while others leaned back against rocks, logs, or simple bedding made from natural materials. The fire continued to burn steadily, casting its shifting light across the group. In this gradual transition, the hearth served as a bridge between social life and sleep. The same place where people shared knowledge and companionship became the place where they rested through the night. This continuity between evening gathering and sleep had practical advantages. Moving to a completely different location after darkness fell would have required navigating the landscape with limited visibility. By remaining near the fire, people could settle into rest without exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. The warmth and light were already present, and the group remained together within the familiar boundary created by the hearth. Instead of dispersing across the landscape, individuals stayed within a shared space that had already proven safe and comfortable during the evening hours. Over many generations, this repeated pattern may have shaped how human communities organized their nightly routines. The fire naturally marked the center of activity as daylight faded. People returned to it after traveling through the environment during the day. Evening conversation unfolded there. Gradually, that same location became the place where the group prepared for sleep. The transition from wakefulness to rest did not require a change in location or structure. It occurred within the same circle that had already gathered the community together. In this way, the hearth provided both social continuity and physical stability across the hours of evening and night. The presence of companions nearby may also have influenced how safely individuals felt while resting. Humans are social mammals, and the awareness of others within the same space can reduce feelings of isolation or vulnerability. When people slept near one another around a fire, they remained within sight or hearing of the group. Even while resting, individuals could sense the quiet movements of others adjusting their position or tending the embers. These subtle signals reinforced the sense that the group remained alert to its surroundings. Instead of facing the night alone, each person rested within a shared field of awareness, created by the presence of companions and the steady glow of the hearth. The gentle sounds of the fire itself also contributed to this environment. Burning wood produces a steady pattern of soft crackling and shifting embers. These sounds are irregular, but not sudden or alarming. Over time, the human brain may have come to recognize such sounds as familiar background signals during the night. Within the circle of warmth and light, the quiet noise of the fire formed part of the sensory landscape that surrounded the sleeping group. Rather than silence that might amplify every distant movement, the fire provided a constant presence that blended into the natural rhythms of the night. By the time sleep fully arrived, the hearth remained the silent center of the camp. Some individuals might wake occasionally to add wood or adjust the burning logs, ensuring that the flame continued through the coldest hours before dawn. Others slept while the fire slowly changed from bright flames to glowing embers and back again as fuel was added. The group passed the night together within this steady pattern of warmth, light, and companionship. Across hundreds of thousands of years, countless evenings likely followed a similar rhythm. The fire gathered people together at the end of the day, supported their conversations, and then quietly watched over the group as sleep settled across the circle. Long before artificial lighting existed, the only light humans regularly experienced after sunset came from natural sources. The moon, the stars, and occasional lightning offered brief or distant illumination, but these sources rarely provided enough light to support detailed activity on the ground. Fire changed that experience by introducing a new kind of light into the human night. Unlike the steady brightness of modern lamps, firelight moves and shifts constantly. Flames rise and fall as wood burns, and the glow of embers pulses gently as air flows through the fire. This living quality of firelight creates a visual environment very different from the stable lighting that surrounds most people today. For early humans, this flickering light became the primary way the night was illuminated. Human eyes respond differently to changing light than to constant brightness. The soft movement of firelight produces shadows that slowly shift across nearby surfaces. Faces, hands, and objects appear and disappear in subtle patterns as the flames move. This slow rhythm can draw the attention of the human mind without demanding intense focus. Many people today still find themselves watching the movement of flames for long periods without becoming restless. The gentle variation in brightness creates a visual experience that feels calm rather than stimulating. In early human camps, this environment likely shaped the mood of the evening hours. Instead of the sharp contrast between bright light and darkness that electric lamps produce, firelight offered a softer transition between day and night. The intensity of firelight is also much lower than the brightness produced by modern lighting systems. A typical hearth illuminates only the area close to the flame. Beyond that small space, the world quickly fades back into shadow. This limited brightness means that firelight supports simple activities without overwhelming the human senses. People can see enough to recognize faces, adjust tools, or prepare materials, but the surrounding darkness remains present. The eyes do not need to adapt to strong artificial brightness. Instead, they adjust gradually to a low-light environment where both light and shadow coexist. This balance between light and darkness may have influenced how the human body experienced the transition towards sleep. As evening progressed and the fire burned steadily, the environment around the hearth remained calm and dim rather than bright and stimulating. The human nervous system responds to light levels when regulating the body's internal rhythms. Exposure to intense light, especially in the evening, can signal the brain to remain alert. In contrast, lower levels of light allow the body to begin preparing for rest. Firelight, by its nature, rarely reaches the brightness required to fully interrupt this process. Its glow provides visibility without creating the same level of stimulation as artificial illumination. For early humans, this meant that the presence of fire did not completely transform night into day. Instead, it created a gentle environment where activity could continue briefly before sleep gradually arrived. The flickering patterns of firelight also shaped how people visually experienced the space around them. Shadows moved slowly across the ground, and nearby objects appeared in warm tones of orange and gold. This visual environment was consistent across countless nights throughout human history. Wherever a hearth burned, the same patterns of light and shadow filled the surrounding space. Over generations, the human brain may have become deeply familiar with these rhythms. The presence of firelight signaled that the group had reached the quiet hours of evening, when movement slowed and attention turned inward toward the circle of companions gathered nearby. In this way, the light of fire became more than a practical tool for seeing in the dark. It shaped the sensory atmosphere of the human night, creating a calm and gently illuminated space where the body could transition from the activity of day toward the rest that followed. The human body follows internal rhythms that repeat every day. These rhythms influence when people feel alert, when they feel tired, and how the body prepares for sleep. One of the most important signals guiding this cycle is light. When bright light reaches the eyes, it sends information to parts of the brain that help regulate the body's internal clock. This process influences hormones, body temperature, and patterns of wakefulness. For most of human history, however, the light that reached human eyes after sunset was very different from the light people experience today. Instead of bright electric illumination, Early humans spent their evenings surrounded by the softer glow of firelight. Firelight interacts with the human eye in a particular way. Its brightness is relatively low compared with modern lighting. It illuminates only a limited area and fades quickly beyond the edges of the hearth. Because of this, the eyes never fully adapt to strong brightness when sitting near a fire. Instead, they remain in a state where both the glow of the flame and the surrounding darkness are visible at the same time. This balance allows the body to recognize that night has arrived, even while some light remains present. In other words, firelight supports visibility without completely replacing the natural darkness of the environment. The color of firelight is also distinctive. Flames produced by burning wood emit warm tones of orange and red rather than the cooler white light produced by many modern bulbs. These warm colors arise from the way heat excites particles within the burning material, causing them to release light at specific wavelengths. For the human eye, this warm glow produces a visual atmosphere that feels gentle and natural. Surfaces near the fire appear in soft shades rather than sharp brightness. Shadows move gradually as the flames shift. This visual environment contrasts strongly with the uniform illumination produced by electric lights that remain constant throughout the night. The movement of firelight adds another element to the evening environment. Flames rarely stay perfectly still. Air currents and the slow burning of wood cause the fire to flicker, sending waves of brightness across nearby surfaces. This constant but gentle motion produces patterns that the human brain can follow without strain. Instead of focusing on a fixed point of light, the eyes observe slow changes in brightness and shadow. Such patterns can hold attention quietly, without creating the sense of urgency or stimulation that strong artificial lighting sometimes produces. Over many generations, the human nervous system may have become familiar with these subtle rhythms of firelight during the hours before sleep. Evening gatherings around a hearth often unfolded within this calm visual environment. People could see one another clearly enough to speak and share experiences, yet the surrounding darkness remained present beyond the edges of the light. This balance may have encouraged the body to begin its natural transition toward rest. As conversations slowed and the fire burned lower, the environment gradually became dimmer. The body could respond to this change by preparing for sleep without experiencing a sudden shift from brightness to darkness. In contrast, modern lighting systems often keep environments brightly illuminated long after sunset. Strong artificial light can signal the brain to remain alert even during hours when the body would normally prepare for rest. Early humans did not live within such conditions. Their evenings were shaped by the softer glow of flames that illuminated only a small part of the landscape. Within that circle of warm light, the body could remain aware of the approaching night, while still enjoying the comfort and visibility provided by the hearth. In this way, firelight became part of the natural rhythm guiding the transition from day into sleep. As the night progressed and the fire slowly changed from bright flames to glowing embers, the surrounding environment gradually became quieter and dimmer. This natural transition played an important role in how early humans experienced the final hours before sleep. Unlike modern lighting systems that maintain constant brightness, a fire rarely burns with the same intensity for long periods. Wood collapses inward as it burns, embers shift, and flames rise or fall depending on how air moves through the hearth. These changes create a slow rhythm of light that evolves over the course of the evening. For people resting nearby, the environment subtly signals the passage of time without the need for clocks or artificial cues. The human brain is sensitive to such gradual changes in light and temperature. As the flames begin to lower and the surrounding glow becomes softer, the visual world around the hearth slowly fades into deeper shadow. The brightest parts of the fire remain visible, but the edges of the camp grow darker. Faces become less defined, and movements become quieter and slower. This gradual dimming may help the body shift from social wakefulness into a more restful state. Instead of experiencing a sudden drop from bright light into darkness, early humans lived through a gentle descent into night as the fire burned lower. The warmth of the hearth followed a similar rhythm. Fresh wood placed on the fire produced strong heat and bright flames. As that wood slowly turned into embers, the heat softened and spread more evenly through the surrounding air. People resting nearby could feel these changes even while half asleep. If the night grew colder or the embers faded too much, someone might wake briefly to place another piece of wood onto the fire. The flame would brighten again for a time before returning to its slower cycle. This quiet interaction between people and the fire created a shared responsibility for maintaining the environment through the night. Over many generations, these patterns likely became familiar within human communities. The steady flicker of firelight, the warmth spreading through the air, and the soft sounds of burning wood formed a sensory background that repeated night after night. Such consistent experiences can shape how the brain interprets signals from the environment. When certain sounds or patterns appear regularly during rest, the mind may begin to treat them as normal features of a safe sleeping environment. In this way, the gentle crackle of a hearth and the shifting glow of embers could become associated with the security of the group gathered nearby. The circle of firelight also helped maintain a balance between awareness and rest. Complete darkness can make it difficult for humans to monitor their surroundings, while bright illumination may keep the mind alert. Firelight created a middle condition where the group remained partially aware of the environment without being fully stimulated by strong light. If someone stirred or if an unusual sound came from the darkness beyond the camp, the glow of the fire allowed the group to orient themselves quickly. At the same time, the gentle level of light allowed most individuals to remain relaxed enough for sleep. This balance may have helped human groups rest more effectively while still remaining capable of responding to disturbances during the night. By the time the darkest hours arrived before dawn, the hearth often burned as a bed of glowing embers rather than tall flames. These embers continued to release warmth and faint light even when the fire appeared almost asleep. The group resting nearby remained within this quiet pocket of warmth and shadow, surrounded by the vast darkness of the landscape. In that environment, firelight became part of the natural rhythm guiding human nights. It marked the transition from evening activity into rest, and carried the group gently through the hours until the first light of morning returned. For most of human history, sleep did not take place in isolated rooms or behind closed doors. Instead, rest occurred within the shared space of the group. When night arrived and the fire continued to burn at the center of the camp, people settled around the hearth rather than withdrawing into separate areas. The warmth and light of the fire naturally drew individuals toward the same location. Over time, this repeated pattern created a familiar arrangement in which the sleeping space formed around the central flame. Instead of scattered sleeping positions across the landscape, human groups often rested in proximity to one another with the hearth at the center. This arrangement provided several practical advantages. One of the most important was shared awareness. When people sleep in groups, the chances increase that someone will notice unusual sounds or movement during the night. Humans do not all sleep with the same depth or timing. Some individuals remain in lighter stages of sleep, while others experience deeper rest. Across the course of a night, these patterns shift among members of the group. At any given moment, someone may wake briefly, adjust their position, or respond to a sound in the environment. These small awakenings allow the group to maintain a form of quiet vigilance even while most individuals are resting. Researchers studying sleep in small-scale societies have observed similar patterns. Instead of every member of the group sleeping at the exact same time, wakefulness tends to move through the group in waves. One person wakes while another sleeps, and later the pattern shifts again. This arrangement means that the group rarely experiences a moment when every individual is fully asleep at once. While these observations come from modern communities, they offer insight into how group sleeping may have functioned in earlier periods of human history. Within the circle of firelight, such patterns could occur naturally as people rested near one another. The hearth itself supported this shared sleeping arrangement. Its warmth spread outward from the center, encouraging people to position themselves at distances where the heat felt comfortable. Individuals lying closest to the fire experienced stronger warmth, while those slightly farther away felt cooler air. As the night progressed and the fire burned lower, people might adjust their positions slightly to remain comfortable. These small movements were easily noticed by others within the circle, reinforcing the sense that the group remained connected even during sleep. The presence of companions also influenced how secure individuals felt while resting. Humans evolved as social mammals that rely heavily on cooperation for survival. Sleeping alone in an exposed environment would have increased vulnerability to predators or other dangers. By remaining close together, individuals reduced the chance that any single person would face such risks alone. The group functioned as a collective system of awareness. Even when most members were asleep, the presence of others provided reassurance that the environment was still being monitored. Archaeological evidence offers clues that such arrangements may have been common in early human camps. At several sites where ancient hearths have been excavated, the distribution of tools, animal bones, and other materials suggests that daily activity concentrated around a central fire. This pattern implies that people spent extended periods within the same area. When evening arrived, it would have been natural for the group to remain near the hearth rather than dispersing across the surrounding landscape. The same space used for gathering, preparing food, or sharing conversation during daylight hours could easily transform into the sleeping area once night deepened. In this way, the fire did more than provide warmth or light. It organized the physical structure of human rest. The hearth created a stable center where people gathered, talked, and eventually slept together. Across thousands of generations, countless nights likely unfolded in a similar pattern, a circle of people resting near the steady glow of a fire, while the darkness of the wider world surrounded them. When a group of people settles down to sleep near a fire, the arrangement of bodies around the hearth becomes more than a matter of comfort. It also becomes a quiet system of shared awareness. Each person resting near the flame occupies a position within the circle, and that position shapes how they experience the night. Some lie closer to the warmth of the fire, while others remain slightly farther away where the heat is gentler. Yet all remain connected through the same field of light, warmth, and sound that radiates outward from the center. This shared environment allows the group to maintain subtle forms of communication even during sleep. The human body rarely remains completely still for the entire night. People shift their position, stretch, or briefly wake before returning to sleep again. These small movements create sounds or changes in the pattern of light around the fire. When one person stirs, nearby companions may sense that motion without fully waking. Over time, such signals form a quiet network of awareness that spreads across the sleeping group. Even without deliberate effort, the presence of others allows individuals to remain loosely connected to the activity of the camp. In this way, group sleeping creates a distributed form of vigilance rather than relying on a single watchful individual. The fire itself contributes to this shared system. The glow of the hearth illuminates the immediate surroundings, allowing subtle movements to become visible within the circle. If someone sits up to add wood to the fire or adjusts their bedding, the shifting light reveals those actions to others nearby. This visibility reduces the need for loud communication. A person tending the fire can perform the task quietly while the rest of the group continues resting. The gentle movement of light across the camp signals that the fire is still being maintained and that someone remains aware of the environment. These patterns may also have influenced how people position themselves relative to the hearth. Individuals could arrange their sleeping places so that the fire remained visible within their field of vision. Even with eyes partially closed or half awake, the glow of the embers provided a constant reference point. If the light suddenly dimmed or brightened, the change might draw attention and prompt someone to check the fire. In this way, the hearth functioned almost like a quiet signal that helped coordinate the group's awareness throughout the night. The benefits of such arrangements become clearer when considering the challenges of sleeping in natural environments. Outside the circle of light, the landscape remained active with nighttime life. Insects moved through vegetation, small animals foraged for food, and larger predators travelled across their territories. Sounds carried through the cooler air and reached the human camp from varying distances. Within the sleeping group, however, the presence of companions and the steady glow of the fire created a buffer against these uncertainties. Instead of reacting individually to every distant sound, the group shared the responsibility of noticing unusual disturbances. If something unexpected occurred, the chances increased that at least one person would become alert and draw the attention of others. This shared system of awareness allowed individuals to rest more comfortably than they might have if sleeping alone. Each person contributed to the safety of the group simply by being present within the circle. The fire at the center strengthened this arrangement by providing light, warmth, and a focal point for attention. Over many generations, these nightly patterns likely became deeply familiar within human communities. The act of gathering around a hearth and settling into sleep near one another would have felt natural because it matched the conditions that supported survival. Within that circle of warmth and quiet movement, the group passed the night together while the fire continued its steady work at the center of their shared space. As the night deepened and most members of the group drifted into sleep, the circle around the hearth remained quietly connected through warmth, light, and the presence of one another. This shared space allowed the group to pass the night not as isolated individuals, but as a collective resting system. Each person's position around the fire contributed to the stability of the whole. Some slept deeply, while others remained in lighter stages of rest. Over the course of the night, these states shifted naturally among the group. One individual might wake briefly to adjust their position, listen to the surrounding environment, or place another piece of wood onto the fire before returning to sleep. Another might stir later as the embers dimmed or as a distant sound carried through the air. In this way, wakefulness moved slowly through the circle without requiring anyone to remain alert for the entire night. The fire itself played an important role in supporting this rhythm. As long as the hearth continued to glow, it signaled that the center of the camp remained active. Even when the flames lowered, the bed of embers still produced warmth and faint light that filled the immediate surroundings. Anyone who opened their eyes briefly during the night could orient themselves by the presence of that glow. The fire served as a constant reference point, allowing people to understand their position within the camp without needing to move or speak. This simple visual anchor helped maintain a sense of stability during the long hours of darkness. Sleeping near the hearth also meant that the group remained physically close together. In many natural environments, distance increases vulnerability during the night. A person resting alone would have fewer opportunities to detect approaching movement and less support if danger appeared. By remaining near one another, individuals shared both warmth and awareness. The presence of several bodies within the same space produced additional heat, which combined with the warmth of the fire to create a more comfortable environment. The quiet sounds of breathing, shifting, and the soft crackle of the hearth formed a familiar background that signaled the group was still present. Over many generations, this pattern of group sleep likely became deeply embedded in human life. Evening gatherings around the fire gradually faded into sleep without requiring people to separate from one another. The same circle that supported conversation and shared attention earlier in the night transformed naturally into the sleeping arrangement. People simply remained where they were, adjusting their position on the ground as rest took over. The hearth remained at the center, continuing to burn quietly while the group slept around it. Archaeological evidence from ancient camps often suggests that activities clustered around hearths rather than being spread widely across a site. Stone tools, food remains, and other traces of daily life frequently appear within a limited distance of the fire. This pattern indicates that people spent much of their time near the hearth even during daylight hours. When night arrived, it would have been natural for the group to remain in the same area rather than creating a separate sleeping location. In this way, the hearth acted not only as the center of evening life, but also as the center of rest. Across vast stretches of human history, countless nights likely unfolded in this quiet arrangement. The fire burned at the center while people slept in a loose circle around it. Some stirred occasionally to tend the embers or listen to the sounds beyond the camp. Others slept deeply through the cooler hours before dawn. Together they formed a shared environment where warmth, awareness, and companionship combined to carry the group safely through the night until the first light of morning returned. When archaeologists attempt to understand how ancient humans lived, they often begin by studying the traces left behind in the ground. These traces are rarely dramatic. Most of the time, they consist of fragments, pieces of stone tools, bones from animals that were eaten, or layers of soil that reveal where people once gathered. Among these subtle signs, one of the most important indicators of human activity is the presence of a hearth. A hearth is the place where fire was repeatedly built and maintained. Even after thousands of years, the evidence of these fires can remain visible in the soil, as charcoal, ash, burned stones, and darkened earth. These small traces allow researchers to reconstruct how fire was used in ancient human camps. At many prehistoric sites across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia, archaeologists have discovered areas where such burned material appears again and again in the same location. The repeated pattern suggests that these places were not used for fire only once. Instead, people returned to the same spot and built new fires there over long periods of time. Each fire left a thin layer of ash and charcoal behind. Over the years, these layers accumulated, forming a record of repeated human presence. By carefully examining these deposits, scientists can begin to understand how central fire was to daily life in early human communities. The structure of many ancient campsites reveals a consistent pattern. Near the center of the site, archaeologists often find a hearth or a cluster of hearths surrounded by other signs of activity. Stone tools used for cutting or scraping appear within a short distance of the burned area. Fragments of animal bones may show marks from tools used to process meat. Sometimes pieces of heated stone or cracked bone indicate that food was prepared or warmed near the fire. These patterns suggest that the hearth functioned as the focal point of the camp. People gathered around it not only to maintain the flame but also to carry out many of the tasks that supported daily survival. The repeated presence of hearths across different sites indicates that this arrangement was not unique to a single place or culture. Instead, it appears across wide geographic regions and time periods. From early human settlements in Africa to later sites in Eurasia, the pattern of a central fire surrounded by human activity appears again and again. This consistency suggests that once humans learned to manage fire reliably, the hearth became a stable feature of their living space. The fire was not simply used when needed and then abandoned. It became an anchor around which the structure of daily life formed. Some archaeological sites reveal hearths located inside natural shelters such as caves or beneath rock overhangs. In these environments, the traces of fire can be preserved particularly well because wind and rain disturb the ground less frequently. Layers of ash sometimes appear stacked above one another, showing that fires were built repeatedly in the same spot over long periods. Such evidence suggests that certain locations served as camps where human groups returned again and again. Each time they arrived, they rebuilt the hearth in the familiar place where fires had burned before. This repeated use hints at how deeply fire had become integrated into the rhythms of human life. From the perspective of archaeology, the hearth provides more than evidence of fire itself. It also offers clues about how people organized their space and activities. When researchers map the distribution of artifacts around a hearth, they often discover that tools, food remains, and other objects appear in patterns that radiate outward from the center. This pattern suggests that the fire served as the heart of the camp. Around it, people sat, worked, talked, and eventually slept. In this way, the traces preserved in the soil help reveal how the simple act of maintaining a fire shaped the structure of human life for countless generations. When archaeologists study ancient hearths, they often begin by examining the layers of soil that formed over long periods of time. These layers act like a quiet record of events that occurred thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. Each time a fire burned, it left behind small fragments of charcoal and ash. When people abandoned a camp, wind, rain, and natural processes slowly covered those remains with new soil. If the same place was used again later, another fire might be built on top of the earlier one. Over generations, this process created stacked layers of burned material preserved beneath the surface of the ground. By carefully excavating these layers, researchers can identify where fires were repeatedly maintained. The presence of such repeated hearths provides strong evidence that fire was not a rare or accidental event in early human camps. Instead, it appears to have been part of a consistent pattern of living. In many prehistoric sites, the burned areas are located in positions that suggest intentional placement. The hearths are often surrounded by clear spaces where people likely sat or worked, while tools and food remains appear slightly farther away. This spatial organization indicates that the fire served as a central point around which other activities were arranged. Even though the physical structures used by early humans were simple, the arrangement of objects in the soil reveals an underlying order shaped by the presence of fire. Some archaeological sites provide particularly detailed evidence of these patterns. In certain caves and rock shelters, the remains of ancient hearths are preserved so clearly that researchers can see where stones were placed to support the fire. These stones may have been arranged intentionally to contain burning wood or to create a stable surface for cooking. Over time, repeated heating often cracked or discolored the stones, leaving visible marks that confirm their exposure to high temperatures. When these stones appear together with charcoal and ash deposits, they provide strong confirmation that a hearth once existed at that location. These discoveries reveal something important about the relationship between humans and fire. Maintaining a hearth requires more than simply lighting a flame. It involves choosing a suitable location, preparing materials that will burn effectively, and protecting the fire from wind or moisture. The presence of carefully positioned hearths suggests that early humans developed practical knowledge about how to manage fire within their living spaces. This knowledge would have been passed from one generation to the next as people learned where to place fires and how to maintain them safely. As a result, the hearth gradually became a stable feature of human camps rather than a temporary or unpredictable event. The distribution of artifacts around these hearths also helps archaeologists understand how people moved and interacted within the camp. Tools used for cutting or shaping materials are often found within a short distance of the fire, where light and warmth would have made such tasks easier during evening hours. Animal bones showing signs of cutting or burning sometimes appear nearby, suggesting that food preparation took place close to the hearth. Other objects appear farther away, indicating areas where people may have slept or stored materials. Together, these patterns create a picture of a living space, organized around the central presence of fire. Through these careful observations, archaeologists can begin to reconstruct how human communities used fire as part of their everyday environment. The hearth emerges as more than a place where wood was burned. It becomes a marker of human presence, cooperation, and shared activity. Wherever ancient hearths appear in the soil, they indicate that people once gathered there, tended the flame, and organized their lives around its warmth and light. When archaeologists compare hearths found at different sites across the world, a remarkable pattern begins to appear. Despite the enormous distances between these locations, many camps reveal similar arrangements centered around fire. From early human sites in Africa to settlements that appeared later in parts of Europe and Asia, hearths often occupy the middle of the living space, surrounded by the traces of daily activity. This repeated pattern suggests that once humans learned how to maintain fire reliably, they began organizing their living environments in ways that placed the hearth at the center of life. The consistency of these patterns across continents tells an important story about human behavior. Early human groups lived in many different landscapes, from open savannas to forest edges and rocky shelters. The climates, animals, and available resources varied widely between these environments. Yet the archaeological traces of fire remain strikingly similar. Hearths appear where people gathered, and the objects associated with everyday life cluster around them. Such patterns indicate that fire provided a stable structure that could adapt to many different environments while still serving the same basic purpose. Wherever humans carried fire, they carried with them a way to organize the space where they lived. In some sites, archaeologists have discovered multiple hearths within a single area, each representing a different period of occupation. These hearths sometimes appear stacked in layers, one built on top of another as soil gradually accumulated between visits. This layering reveals that certain locations were returned to repeatedly over long stretches of time. Each time a group arrived, they may have recognized the familiar place where earlier fires had burned. Building a new hearth in the same spot would have been a natural choice, especially if the location already provided protection from wind or access to fuel. Over generations, the ground itself preserved a record of these repeated gatherings around fire. The spatial patterns surrounding these hearths offer further insight into how people used them. Tools, animal bones, and fragments of daily materials often appear within a limited radius of the fire. The density of these objects gradually decreases as the distance from the hearth increases. This pattern suggests that people spent most of their time near the fire while performing tasks, such as preparing food, shaping tools, or sharing conversation. The farther from the hearth one moves, the fewer traces of activity appear, indicating that those outer areas may have been used less frequently. In this way, the archaeological record preserves a quiet map of how human life once revolved around a central flame. These discoveries help confirm that sleeping near fire was not an occasional behavior but a long-lasting habit within human communities. If the hearth served as the center of evening activity and social interaction, it would also have been the most natural place for the group to remain as night deepened. Instead of moving away from the fire, people likely stayed within its warmth and light, gradually settling into rest around the same center where they had gathered earlier in the evening. The evidence preserved in ancient soil cannot show the exact moment when people lay down to sleep, but the spatial patterns strongly suggest that the hearth remained the focus of human presence even during the quiet hours of night. Across hundreds of thousands of years, countless fires burned in camps scattered across the landscape. Each hearth left behind small traces of ash and charcoal that eventually became part of the archaeological record. Together, These traces form a widespread pattern showing that fire was deeply woven into the structure of human life. Wherever people traveled, they carried the knowledge of how to build and maintain a hearth. And wherever that hearth appeared, it created a small center around which the activities of the group, including sleep, naturally gathered. Across the long history of our species, countless generations experienced night in the same quiet way. As daylight faded, people gathered around a fire. Conversation slowed, movement decreased, and the circle of light gradually became the center of the group's attention. Children, adults, and elders all shared the same space, feeling the warmth of the fire and watching the shifting glow of flames. This repeated experience formed a common environment in which human life unfolded. Long before written history or permanent buildings appeared, generation after generation passed their evenings and nights within the same simple structure. A small group resting near a hearth. The importance of this pattern becomes clearer when we consider how slowly human evolution unfolds. Biological changes in the human body require many thousands of years to develop. Over such long timescales, repeated environmental conditions can shape how the body and mind respond to the world. For much of human history, the environment surrounding sleep included the presence of fire, the warmth of burning wood, the gentle movement of firelight, and the quiet sounds of embers formed part of the sensory landscape that accompanied human rest. These conditions were experienced not once or twice but across countless nights spanning many generations. Within this shared environment, children grew up observing the nightly routines of the group. They watched adults gather fuel during the day, saw the fire being prepared as evening approached, and eventually settled into sleep near the same hearth. As they grew older, they learned how to maintain the fire themselves. Knowledge about how to build, protect, and manage a hearth was not written down but passed through observation and practice. Young members of the group absorbed these skills simply by living within the rhythm of fire-centered life. In this way, the knowledge of fire became embedded in the everyday habits of human communities. The presence of elders within the group also played a role in maintaining this continuity. Older individuals often carried memories of earlier seasons, past migrations, and successful strategies for survival. Even as their physical strength declined, their experience remained valuable to the community. Sitting near the hearth during the evening allowed elders to share this knowledge with younger members of the group. Stories, advice, and memories could be exchanged within the calm environment created by the fire. Through these interactions, information about the landscape, animals, and seasonal patterns passed quietly from one generation to the next. The hearth, therefore, served not only as a practical tool but also as a meeting point between generations. Over time, this continuity helped shape the cultural structure of early human societies. The evening fire became a place where the day's experiences were reflected upon and where collective memory was reinforced. Children listened, adults discussed plans for future activities, and elders contributed the knowledge accumulated through years of observation. When the conversation slowed and sleep began to settle over the group, the same fire continued burning quietly at the center. The circle of people resting around the hearth contained individuals at different stages of life, yet all shared the same environment of warmth and light. Across thousands of generations, this simple pattern repeated itself. People were born into communities where fire already formed the center of evening life. They learned to gather wood, tend the flames, and rest beside the hearth just as earlier generations had done. Eventually they passed these same habits to their own children. In this way, the relationship between humans and fire became deeply woven into the fabric of human existence. The nightly presence of the hearth linked generations together, creating a continuous thread of shared experience stretching far back into the origins of our species. As generations followed one another across long stretches of time, the presence of fire during the night became one of the most stable elements of human life. Children were born into groups where the evening fire already existed as part of the daily rhythm. They watched adults gather wood during daylight hours, saw the hearth prepared as evening approached, and eventually fell asleep beside the same glow of flames that had illuminated the nights of their parents and grandparents. In this way, the experience of resting near fire was not something people consciously invented in each generation. It was something they inherited simply by living within the traditions of the group. The process through which children learned these habits was quiet and gradual. Young members of the group did not need formal instruction to understand the role of fire in daily life. They observed how older individuals treated the hearth with care, adding fuel at the right times and protecting embers from wind or rain. They noticed where people sat during the evening and how sleeping spaces formed naturally around the fire once darkness deepened. Over time, these patterns became familiar. By the time children were old enough to take responsibility for maintaining the fire themselves, the actions required to do so already felt natural. This method of learning through observation and participation was likely essential in early human societies, where knowledge was preserved not through written records but through shared experience. Fire was one of the most important pieces of knowledge passed in this way. Knowing how to maintain a hearth meant understanding which types of wood burned well, how to protect a fire during changing weather, and how to keep embers alive through the coldest hours of night. These skills allowed a group to preserve warmth, light, and safety even in difficult environments. As each generation practiced these skills, the connection between human life and fire grew stronger. The hearth also played a role in shaping how generations interacted with one another. In many early human communities, evenings near the fire created opportunities for different age groups to share the same space. Younger members listened while adults discussed the events of the day or made plans for the following morning. Elders who had accumulated years of experience observing animals, weather patterns, and seasonal changes could pass along knowledge that younger individuals had not yet encountered. Because the fire provided light and warmth after sunset, these exchanges could occur even when the tasks of the day had ended. The hearth therefore helped extend the time available for learning within the group. The repeated experience of these gatherings likely reinforced the social bonds that held early human communities together. When individuals sit near a fire, they remain within close visual and physical proximity to one another. The glow of the flames illuminates faces and gestures, allowing subtle forms of communication to continue even in the quiet hours of evening. Over time, the presence of the hearth may have strengthened the sense that the group shared not only resources, but also a common place of rest and reflection. The fire became a symbol of continuity between past and present, linking the memories of older generations with the experiences of younger ones. As the night deepened and the conversations gradually faded, the same fire continued burning while people settled into sleep around it. Children slept beside parents, younger adults rested near elders, and the entire group remained within the circle of warmth and light created by the hearth. In this way, the presence of fire connected generations not only through shared knowledge, but also through shared rest. Each night repeated the same quiet pattern. The group gathered, spoke, listened, and eventually slept beside the flame that had illuminated human nights for countless generations before them. Over very long stretches of time, the repeated presence of fire in human camps created a shared environment that connected generations through the same nightly experience. Parents, children, and elders all lived within the same rhythms of daylight and darkness, and the hearth became the point where those rhythms came together each evening. The activities of the day slowly drew to a close as people returned to the fire. Conversations unfolded in its glow, and eventually the group settled into rest nearby. Because this pattern repeated night after night, it gradually became one of the most stable features of human life. The hearth served as a quiet link between past and future within the group. Older individuals sitting near the fire had once been children, listening to the voices of their own elders. Years later, they found themselves in the same place, passing along knowledge to the next generation. The physical setting remained almost unchanged. The same circle of light illuminated faces, and the same warmth spread outward from burning wood. Even as the individuals within the group changed over time, the environment created by the fire remained familiar. This continuity helped preserve not only practical knowledge, but also the social relationships that held the community together. The experience of growing up around a hearth also shaped how young people learned to interpret the natural world. As children listened to adults describe the movements of animals, the changes of seasons, or the locations of water and shelter, they were gradually building an understanding of the environment they would one day navigate on their own. The calm setting created by the fire allowed these explanations to unfold slowly, without the urgency of daytime survival tasks. Younger members of the group could ask questions, observe tools being repaired, or watch how elders interpreted the events of the day. In this way, the hearth became a place where memory and learning were woven into the daily rhythm of life. The presence of fire during sleep further reinforced this connection between generations. When the group settled down for the night, individuals of different ages remained close to one another around the hearth. Children slept within the warmth and protection of the group, often near parents or older relatives. Adults rested nearby, and elders remained within the same circle. The fire continued to burn quietly at the center while the group passed through the night together. This shared environment allowed each generation to experience rest in the same conditions as those who came before them. Over thousands of years, these repeated experiences likely shaped how human communities understood the meaning of home and safety. The hearth was not simply a tool for warmth or cooking. It represented a place where the group gathered, shared knowledge, and rested together. The presence of fire signaled that the group had established a temporary center within the landscape. Even if the camp moved after a few days or weeks, the same pattern would appear again wherever the next hearth was built. In this sense, fire allowed humans to carry a familiar structure of life with them as they traveled through different environments. Across the immense timeline of human history, generation after generation experienced this same quiet pattern. People gathered near fire at the end of the day, shared the knowledge necessary for survival, and then slept within the circle of warmth created by the hearth. The individuals changed, but the structure of the night remained remarkably similar. Through this continuity, fire became woven into the deepest habits of human life, linking countless generations through the simple act of resting together beside a flame. For most of human history, the presence of fire shaped the experience of night in a very direct way. The hearth remained close to the people who depended on it. When the group gathered, the fire was nearby. When they spoke, prepared food, or rested, the same flame continued burning at the center of the camp. Yet as human societies slowly changed over time, the relationship between people and fire began to shift in subtle ways. These changes did not happen suddenly. They unfolded gradually as humans developed new forms of shelter and new ways of organizing their living spaces. One of the most important changes came with the increasing use of more stable structures for protection. In earlier periods, many human groups relied on open camps, temporary shelters, or natural formations such as caves and rock overhangs. In these environments, the hearth often remained directly within the shared living space. People gathered around the fire in the open air, and the warmth and light of the flame spread freely into the surrounding environment. As humans began constructing more durable shelters using wood, earth, or stone, the role of fire had to adapt to these new conditions. A fire burning inside an enclosed space requires careful control. Smoke produced by burning wood must be able to escape, and the flame must be placed where it will not ignite nearby materials. These practical concerns gradually influenced where and how hearths were built. Instead of open fires placed anywhere within the camp, many communities began creating designated hearth areas within their shelters. These hearths were sometimes surrounded by stones or built into shallow pits in the ground to contain the burning wood safely. Over time, such arrangements became common in many settled environments. The shift from open camps to more structured shelters did not remove fire from human life. Instead, it repositioned the hearth within a more controlled space. The fire remained the center of evening activity, but its location became more carefully planned. Within a shelter, the hearth often occupied the middle of the living area, or a place where smoke could rise and escape through an opening above. People continued to gather around it just as they had in earlier times, but now the surrounding walls created a more enclosed environment. The warmth of the fire could be retained more effectively within these structures, providing additional comfort during colder seasons. Archaeological evidence from later prehistoric settlements shows clear signs of this transition. Excavations at ancient dwellings sometimes reveal hearths placed within the central floor of houses or near openings designed to release smoke. Burned clay, ash deposits, and stone arrangements indicate that fires were used repeatedly in these interior spaces. Around the hearth, the familiar pattern of human activity continues to appear. Tools, food remains, and other traces of daily life clustered within a short distance of the flame. Even though the physical setting had changed, the central role of fire remained largely the same. This transition reflects a broader pattern in human adaptation. As people develop new ways of shaping their environment, building shelters, organizing villages, and eventually creating more permanent settlements, the functions of older technologies were adjusted rather than abandoned. Fire continued to provide warmth, light, and a place for gathering after sunset. The difference was that these activities now occurred within structures that offered additional protection from weather and wind. The hearth remained the quiet center of human life during the night, but it now existed within walls that humans had constructed themselves. In this way, the long relationship between humans and fire entered a new stage. The flame that had once burned in open camps across ancient landscapes now burned within the sheltered spaces of early homes. Even as human environments became more structured, the familiar pattern persisted. Evening gathering near the hearth, followed by rest within the warmth and light that the fire provided. As human shelters became more structured and permanent, the role of the hearth gradually adapted to the new environments people created for themselves. Instead of burning in open camps beneath the sky, fires were increasingly placed inside dwellings built from wood, stone, earth, or other natural materials. This change did not remove fire from the center of daily life. Rather, it brought the hearth into a more defined position within the home. The flame that once illuminated open ground now burned within walls, becoming part of the structure that protected the group from wind, rain, and cold. Within these early dwellings, the hearth often occupied a carefully chosen location. In many cases, it was placed near the center of the living space so that warmth could spread outward evenly in all directions. The placement also allowed people to gather around the fire just as they had done in earlier outdoor camps. Even though the walls of the shelter created a new boundary between the group and the surrounding landscape, the circle of people around the hearth remained a familiar pattern. The fire continued to serve as the focus of evening life, where cooking, conversation, and preparation for sleep took place. Managing fire within enclosed spaces required additional knowledge and attention. Smoke from burning wood needed a path to escape, otherwise it could accumulate inside the shelter and make the air difficult to breathe. To address this problem, many early dwellings included openings above the hearth where smoke could drift upward and leave the structure. In some designs, small vents or gaps near the roof allowed fresh air to enter while smoke exited through the highest point of the shelter. These solutions demonstrate that people gradually learned how to shape their buildings in ways that allowed fire to remain part of daily life without creating danger. Archaeological sites from early villages and settlements often preserve clear signs of these interior hearths. When researchers excavate the floors of ancient houses, they frequently find darkened areas of soil, ash deposits, and fragments of burned materials where fires once burned repeatedly. Stones arranged in circular patterns sometimes mark the edges of these hearths, helping to contain the fire safely within the dwelling. Surrounding these areas, the familiar traces of human activity appear again: tools used for preparing food, bones from animals that were eaten, and objects related to daily living. These patterns show that even within early homes, the hearth remained the center around which many aspects of life were organized. The presence of interior hearths also influenced how people experienced warmth during colder seasons. In open camps, heat from a fire could quickly disperse into the surrounding air. Inside a shelter, however, the walls and roof helped retain some of that warmth. The heat produced by the hearth could spread through the enclosed space, making the interior of the dwelling more comfortable during cool nights. People resting within the shelter could remain closer to the warmth for longer periods, reducing the discomfort that might otherwise come with cold nighttime temperatures. Despite these architectural changes, the deeper pattern of human life around fire remained remarkably consistent. Evening still brought people together near the hearth. The glow of the flame illuminated faces and objects within the dwelling just as it had once done in open camps. Conversations unfolded, meals were prepared, and eventually the group settled into sleep while the fire continued burning nearby. The walls of the shelter offered additional protection, but the hearth remained the familiar center that guided the transition from day into night. In this way, even as human societies became more settled and their dwellings more complex, the ancient relationship between sleep and fire continued within the spaces people built to call home. As human settlements became larger and more organized, the role of the hearth continued to evolve while still maintaining its familiar presence in daily life. Houses became more defined spaces with walls, entrances, and designated areas for different activities. Within these environments, the hearth often remained one of the most stable features of the dwelling. It provided warmth during cold nights, light during the evening hours, and a place where members of the household naturally gathered. Even as villages and early communities formed, the quiet glow of fire still marked the center of domestic life after sunset. In many early homes, the hearth became closely associated with the identity of the household itself. Families built their routines around the presence of the fire. During the day, it might be used for cooking or heating materials. As evening approached, the same hearth would be tended again so that flames would rise and light the interior of the dwelling. The glow of the fire illuminated walls, tools, and the faces of those who lived there. In this setting, the hearth functioned as both a practical tool and a symbolic center where the life of the household unfolded. The structure of the home also influenced how people arranged themselves for rest. Unlike the open camps of earlier periods, where larger groups slept together near a single fire, houses often contained smaller family units. Even so, the principle remained similar. People rested within reach of the hearth's warmth and light. Bedding materials such as animal skins, woven mats, or plant fibers were often placed on the ground near the fire, allowing sleepers to remain within the comfortable zone created by the hearth. The enclosed space of the house helped retain warmth, making the fire even more effective at softening the cold of night. Archaeological studies of early dwellings frequently reveal these arrangements. Hearths appear in the center or slightly offset within the floor of ancient houses, surrounded by areas where everyday activities occurred. Nearby, researchers sometimes find remains of bedding materials or tools associated with evening tasks. These patterns suggest that the hearth continued to anchor both waking and sleeping life within the home. Even as architectural designs changed over time, the fire remained a consistent feature guiding how space inside the dwelling was organized. The relationship between fire and rest gradually became part of the cultural traditions of many societies. Maintaining the household hearth was often considered an important responsibility. Someone in the household would ensure that the fire remained alive through the night or that embers were preserved so that flames could easily be revived in the morning. This responsibility connected daily routines across generations, much as the earlier hearths of open camps had done. The fire symbolized continuity within the home, linking the activities of one day with the beginning of the next. Over time, new technologies would eventually begin to change this ancient pattern. Improvements in architecture, heating methods, and lighting systems slowly reduced the need for open flames within living spaces. Yet for thousands of years before these developments appeared, the hearth remained central to human life after sunset. Within the walls of early homes, people still gathered near fire as evening approached and rested within its warmth during the night. Even though the surrounding environment had changed from open landscapes to constructed dwellings, the familiar relationship between humans and fire continued. The hearth still marked the quiet center of the home, guiding the transition from the activity of day into the rest that followed each night. For an immense span of human history, the presence of fire shaped the experience of night in a consistent and familiar way. Whether in open camps beneath the sky or inside the early shelters that people gradually built, the hearth remained the quiet center around which evening life unfolded. Yet over the last few centuries, this ancient pattern began to change more rapidly than at any earlier time. New technologies slowly altered how humans produced light and warmth. As these changes spread through societies, the nightly presence of open fire in human living spaces began to fade. The first major shift occurred as methods of heating and lighting became more specialized. In many parts of the world, enclosed stoves and more controlled fireplaces gradually replaced open hearths. These new designs were safer and more efficient. Instead of a flame burning openly in the center of the room, heat could be contained within metal or stone structures that directed warmth outward while reducing the spread of smoke. Chimneys carried smoke away from the interior of buildings, making homes cleaner and more comfortable. Although fire still existed within these systems, its presence became less visible and less central to the daily gathering of people inside the home. At the same time, new forms of artificial lighting began to appear. Candles and oil lamps had been used in some cultures for many centuries, but their brightness remained limited compared with modern illumination. These sources of light allowed people to extend certain activities beyond sunset, yet they still preserved much of the natural darkness that surrounded the evening hours. The glow of a candle or lamp created small pockets of visibility similar in some ways to the light of a hearth. People could read, work, or speak with one another in this gentle illumination, while the surrounding environment remained dim. The deeper transformation arrived with the development of widespread electrical lighting. Electric lamps provided a level of brightness far stronger and more stable than any flame. With the flip of a switch, entire rooms could be illuminated as brightly as daylight. This innovation changed how people organized their time after sunset. Activities that once ended with the fading of natural light could now continue far into the night. Homes, streets, and workplaces were no longer governed by the same boundaries between day and night that had shaped human life for thousands of years. As electric lighting became common in many parts of the world, the role of fire within the home diminished further. Heating systems powered by electricity, gas, or other fuels replaced open flames as the primary source of warmth. Kitchens used controlled burners rather than wood-burning hearths. Living spaces were illuminated by lamps rather than firelight. The hearth that had once been the center of evening gatherings slowly disappeared from many households, or became a decorative feature rather than a daily necessity. This shift marked a profound change in the sensory environment of human nights. The flickering glow of firelight, which had illuminated countless generations, was replaced by steady and powerful artificial brightness. The gentle sounds of burning wood gave way to quieter forms of heating and lighting that produced little sensory presence. Human life after sunset began to unfold in spaces where darkness was no longer a defining element of the environment. Yet this transformation occurred only very recently when compared with the immense timeline of human history. For the vast majority of our species' existence, the pattern remained remarkably consistent. Evening gathering near a fire followed by sleep within the warmth and light of the hearth. The modern world has altered that pattern, but the long memory of those ancient nights still forms part of the deeper story of how humans once lived beside fire. As artificial lighting and modern heating systems spread through human societies, the sensory landscape of night began to change in ways that earlier generations had never experienced. For thousands of years, the transition from day into night had been gradual. The sun set, darkness deepened, and the glow of fire provided a gentle center of warmth and visibility. The world outside the hearth remained dim, allowing the human body to recognize that evening had arrived. With the arrival of modern lighting, this balance between light and darkness shifted dramatically. Electric illumination allowed entire rooms and streets to remain bright long after sunset. In many homes, the evening environment began to resemble daytime conditions. Light filled spaces evenly and continuously, rather than flickering softly as firelight had done. This new brightness expanded the range of activities people could perform during the night. Work, reading, social gatherings, and travel could continue without relying on the limited glow of a flame. In cities and towns, streets illuminated by electric lamps allowed movement at hours that had once belonged mostly to darkness. The boundaries between day and night gradually became less distinct in daily life. At the same time, modern heating systems changed how people experienced warmth during the night. Instead of gathering near a central hearth to share heat, buildings could distribute warmth evenly through walls, floors, or vents. Radiators, furnaces, and other systems warmed entire rooms rather than concentrating heat in a single location. This meant that individuals no longer needed to remain close together near a fire to stay comfortable. Bedrooms could be located in separate areas of the house, and each person could sleep at a distance from others without losing access to warmth. As a result, the physical arrangement of sleep began to change. People increasingly rested in separate rooms rather than in shared circles around a hearth. These changes altered the social patterns that had once accompanied human nights. In earlier times, the fire naturally drew people together in the evening. The hearth created a gathering point where conversation unfolded and where the group eventually settled into rest nearby. In homes illuminated by electric light and warmed by distributed heating, that central focus became less necessary. Family members could spend time in different parts of the house, each illuminated by separate lamps or screens. When it was time to sleep, individuals often withdrew to private rooms rather than remaining within a shared sleeping space. The disappearance of the hearth as a nightly gathering place therefore reshaped the rhythm of evening life. Despite these transformations, traces of the older pattern still appear in subtle ways. Many homes continue to include fireplaces even when they are used only occasionally. People often gather around these fires during colder seasons, enjoying the warmth and the quiet movement of flames. Outdoor campfires during travel or recreation also draw people into circles where conversation unfolds much as it might have thousands of years ago. These moments suggest that the human attraction to fire has not entirely disappeared, even in environments filled with modern technology. When people sit near a fire today, they sometimes experience a sense of calm or familiarity that feels difficult to explain. The flicker of flames, the warmth spreading outward, and the soft sounds of burning wood recreate elements of the environment in which countless generations once spent their evenings. Although modern life has changed the structure of human nights, the memory of those earlier conditions remains woven into cultural traditions and everyday experiences. Fire may no longer dominate the night as it once did, but its long presence in human history still echoes quietly in the way people respond when they gather once again around a flame. As modern life gradually moved away from the nightly presence of fire, the experience of darkness itself also began to change. For most of human history, darkness was not something that could easily be pushed aside. When the sun set, the world became dim, and only small pockets of light appeared where fires burned. These small circles of firelight allowed people to see one another and continue certain activities, but they did not erase the surrounding night. The stars remained visible overhead, the landscape beyond the hearth faded into shadow, and the human senses remained aware that darkness was still present. In contrast, modern lighting systems allow darkness to be removed almost completely from indoor spaces. With a single switch, entire rooms become brightly illuminated, and the boundaries between day and night can seem to disappear. The soft transition that once guided human evenings has been replaced by a more abrupt and controllable environment. Light no longer fades gradually with the setting sun, but can remain constant for as long as people choose. This transformation represents one of the most significant environmental changes humans have introduced into their daily lives. The difference becomes clearer when comparing the qualities of firelight with those of modern illumination. Firelight is uneven and constantly changing. Flames flicker, shadows move, and brightness rises and falls depending on the wood and the flow of air. This movement creates a dynamic visual field that the human eye observes quietly without strain. Electric lighting, by contrast, is stable and uniform. The brightness remains constant, and shadows appear sharply defined or disappear entirely depending on the design of the lamp. These differences alter how people experience the hours after sunset. The living presence of firelight has largely been replaced by steady illumination that remains unchanged throughout the evening. Another important change lies in how modern environments separate people from natural cycles. In earlier periods, the presence of fire did not remove the awareness of night. Even when a hearth burned brightly, the surrounding darkness remained visible beyond the edges of the light. The human body continued to receive signals from the environment that day had ended and night had begun. Modern lighting can mask those signals. Buildings filled with electric light may look the same whether the sun is above the horizon or far below it. As a result, the visual cues that once accompanied the transition into night have become less noticeable in daily life. Despite these differences, the long relationship between humans and fire has not completely disappeared. In many places, people still light fires during gatherings, celebrations, or outdoor travel. A small campfire beside a lake, a fireplace in a quiet room, or a simple flame burning during a ceremony can still draw people into a circle of warmth and attention. When these moments occur, individuals often find themselves watching the movement of the flames in silence or speaking more softly within the glow of the fire. The environment created by the flame feels familiar even when it appears only occasionally in modern life. This lingering attraction suggests that fire once played a deeper role in shaping the human experience of night. For the vast majority of our species' existence, the hours after sunset unfolded within the gentle glow of a hearth. Generations lived and slept beside flames that illuminated the darkness without fully replacing it. Although modern technology has transformed the structure of human nights, the ancient pattern remains part of the long story of how people once lived. And perhaps the quiet question still lingers within that history. What did those countless nights beside fire shape within the human mind that we rarely notice today? Across the immense timeline of human history, the simple act of sitting beside a fire shaped countless nights in ways that are difficult to fully imagine today. Long before electric lights illuminated homes and cities, the glow of burning wood marked the boundary between the activity of day and the quiet hours of night. People gathered within that circle of warmth and light, shared food and conversation, and eventually rested nearby while the embers continued to glow. This pattern repeated across landscapes and generations for far longer than the modern world has existed. For the majority of human existence, the hearth remained a constant companion during the night. When we consider this long history, it becomes clear that the presence of fire was not a rare or occasional feature of human life. It formed part of the everyday environment in which people lived, learned, and rested. Children grew up watching the movement of flames and listening to the soft sounds of burning wood. Adults tended the fire as part of their nightly routine, ensuring that warmth and light remained available through the darkest hours. Elders shared knowledge beside the hearth, while younger members of the group listened. These repeated experiences formed a rhythm that connected human communities to the natural cycle of day and night. The fire did more than illuminate the darkness. It created a shared space where the group could remain together as evening deepened. In open camps beneath the sky or inside the early shelters that humans later built, the hearth often marked the center of human presence. The warmth spread outward while the surrounding landscape remained quiet and dim. Within that circle, individuals felt the comfort of companionship and the reassurance that the group remained close by. Sleep did not occur in isolation, but within a collective environment shaped by the gentle glow of the fire. Over thousands of generations, these nights accumulated into a vast history of human experience. The same sensory patterns repeated again and again. The warmth of flames against cooler air, the shifting shadows moving across the ground, and the quiet crackle of wood as embers settled. Each night followed a similar progression. Evening conversation gradually faded, bodies grew still, and the group drifted into sleep while the hearth continued to glow. When morning light returned, the fire was revived or rebuilt, and the cycle began again. Yet within the modern world, the presence of fire during the night has largely disappeared from everyday life. Artificial lighting fills rooms with constant brightness, and heating systems distribute warmth without visible flames. The ancient hearth that once formed the center of human evenings now appears only occasionally, often as decoration or during special gatherings. The rhythms that shaped human nights for hundreds of thousands of years have been replaced by environments that remain illuminated and controlled regardless of the time of day. Despite this transformation, the long memory of those earlier nights remains part of the human story. The attraction many people still feel when sitting near a fire hints at how deeply this environment once shaped daily life. The warmth, the flickering light, and the shared circle of attention create a sense of calm that seems familiar even when experienced only occasionally. It is as if the glow of the flame reconnects people with a pattern that accompanied their ancestors for an immense span of time. When viewed from the perspective of deep history, the modern world represents only a brief moment within a much longer human experience. For roughly 90% of that history, night did not unfold under electric lights or within brightly illuminated rooms. It unfolded beside a living flame. And when we pause to consider this long relationship between humans and fire, a quiet question emerges from the darkness beyond the hearth. After so many generations spent sleeping beside fire, how much of that ancient rhythm still remains within us today? If we step back and look at the long arc of human history, the relationship between sleep and fire reveals something quiet but profound about how our species once lived. For hundreds of thousands of years, the rhythm of night unfolded in an environment shaped by a small and carefully maintained flame. The fire did not dominate the darkness. It simply created a modest circle of warmth and light within it. Inside that circle, people gathered, spoke softly, and eventually rested together while the embers glowed nearby. Beyond it, the wider landscape remained dark and largely unchanged by human presence. This arrangement placed human rest within a balance between light and darkness. The hearth allowed people to remain visible to one another and maintain warmth during the night, yet it never removed the surrounding night from existence. The glow faded gradually as the fire burned lower, and the quiet hours before dawn arrived without abrupt transitions. In this setting, sleep was part of a continuous flow that began with sunset and ended when the first light of morning appeared across the horizon. The environment itself gently guided this rhythm rather than forcing it through artificial control. The social structure of these nights also reflected that balance. Humans did not withdraw into separate rooms or isolated spaces when darkness arrived. Instead, they remained close together near the hearth. The presence of the group created a shared sense of security, while individuals rested. Some people stirred occasionally during the night, tending the fire or briefly waking before returning to sleep. Others remained still for longer periods. The group passed through the night as a collective, held together by the warmth and light of the hearth at the center of their shared space. Over immense spans of time, these repeated nights formed a stable background to human existence. Generations lived and died within the same rhythm. Children grew up watching flames dance across the ground while elders spoke beside the fire. The same sensory patterns repeated across countless landscapes. The glow of embers, the smell of smoke drifting upward, the quiet sounds of wood settling into ash. These experiences were so common that they rarely required reflection. They were simply the conditions under which human life unfolded after sunset. The modern world, however, has placed humanity within a very different nighttime environment. Electric lights illuminate homes, streets, and cities with a brightness that earlier generations never experienced. Heating systems provide warmth without requiring the presence of a visible flame. People often sleep in separate rooms rather than in shared circles around a fire. The quiet, sensory background that once accompanied human nights has largely disappeared from daily life. Yet the long history of those earlier nights remains part of the story of our species. For roughly 90% of human existence, sleep occurred within reach of a hearth. Firelight illuminated the final hours of the day, and its warmth carried people through the coldest moments of night. This pattern lasted far longer than the modern systems that have replaced it. In the vast timeline of human life, the age of electric light occupies only a very small portion of the story. When we consider this contrast, the question that began this exploration returns quietly to the surface. If generation after generation of humans once fell asleep beside the glow of fire, surrounded by companions and guided by the slow fading of embers into darkness, what traces of that ancient rhythm might still linger within us today? When we follow the story of human nights across the deep span of time, a simple image appears again and again. A small group sits beside a fire. The flames move gently in the darkness, and the warmth spreads outward through the cool air. People speak quietly for a while, sharing the events of the day or the knowledge that helps them survive in the landscape around them. Gradually the voices fade. One by one, the members of the group settle into rest near the glowing embers, while the fire continues its slow work through the night. For most of human history, this scene was not unusual or rare. It was simply how night arrived. The presence of fire did more than provide warmth and light. It created a stable environment in which human life could continue after sunset. The hearth allowed people to remain together when darkness covered the land. It offered a point of orientation in a world that otherwise became difficult to see. Most importantly, it created a place where the group could pass the night as a shared experience rather than as isolated individuals. Within the circle of the fire, people were close enough to hear one another breathe, to notice small movements, and to sense that the group remained present even while most were asleep. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this environment repeated itself across an extraordinary number of nights. Generations grew up beside the glow of flames, learning to gather fuel, protect embers, and rebuild the hearth each evening. The pattern required cooperation and attention, but it also created a reliable structure for daily life. Daylight brought movement, travel, and the work of survival. Evening returned everyone to the same center, where warmth and light allowed the group to pause, reflect, and eventually rest. In this way, fire quietly shaped how humans experience the passage of time. Yet, the modern world has transformed this ancient pattern more quickly than any previous period of history. Artificial lighting now fills our nights with steady brightness. Heating systems distribute warmth without requiring people to gather around a visible flame. Homes are divided into private rooms where individuals sleep separately rather than within a shared circle. The environment in which human nights unfold today is very different from the one that accompanied our species for the vast majority of its existence. This transformation does not mean that the older pattern has vanished entirely. When people gather around a campfire during travel, sit beside a fireplace during cold weather, or watch flames during a quiet evening outdoors, something familiar often returns. Conversation becomes slower. Attention shifts toward the movement of the fire. People naturally arrange themselves in a loose circle around the warmth and light. These small moments echo the deeper history that shaped human nights for so long. Perhaps the most important lesson hidden within this long story is not simply about fire itself, but about the environment in which human rest once occurred. For thousands of generations, sleep unfolded within a setting that combined warmth, dim light, shared presence, and the gradual fading of evening into darkness. That environment supported the rhythms of human life without forcing them into rigid patterns. It allowed the group to move gently from activity into rest while remaining connected to one another and to the natural cycle of night. Today, the world around us has changed dramatically, yet the long memory of those ancient nights remains part of the human story. And as the final embers of this exploration settle quietly into ash, the same question that has followed us from the beginning still lingers in the dark beyond the firelight. After spending so much of our history sleeping beside a flame, how much of that ancient rhythm still lives quietly within us tonight?